Ex-teachers/professors of Reddit. What was your screw this moment? Caught a student cheating, but stupid cheating. Cheated off of someone else with the wrong answers and the same wrong spelling. When I spoke to him regarding taking a new test, generous on my part considering it should have been a 0 per school policy, he refused and said I would be hearing from his parents. I, of course, did hear from them via my principal within an hour. Gotta love kids and their phones readily available. Fast forward to a meeting with the student, parents, and principal. I had his test and the one from which he cheated. Upon showing this to the parents, I fully expected them to understand and hold their son accountable. No. Instead, the parents demanded an apology from me for branding their son a cheater, which would, quote, negatively impact him for the rest of his life, and also saying it was the least I could do since they were paying my salary. When I said I would not apologize for catching their son cheating, the father then said I was lucky I was a woman because otherwise he would punch me in the face. Nice. So yeah, good times. Glad I got my master's degree for that. Story 2. I caught a kid selling drugs in the hallways and turned him in. He threatened to murder me with an ice pick. He was super unstable and volatile, and had a criminal record, so I didn't doubt that he might try it. The principal refused to remove him from my class because, quote, he has a right to have an education. My other students took it upon themselves to escort me through the school in between classes and walk me to my car after school in a big huddle, so Ice Pick Boy couldn't get to me. Screw that. Edit. Lots of people have asked why I didn't contact the police. I actually did. We had PD stationed in the school, but nothing happened because the kid's mom was a cop and she pulled strings to have the whole thing quashed. I didn't file a union grievance because it was almost the end of the school year and that crap takes time. I decided to quit and move far, far away instead. Also, to everyone telling me I shouldn't have ratted on the kid and to quote, snitches get stitches, I get it, you're edgy, but it is literally my job to help these kids become functioning adults. And selling drugs in front of your teacher is definitely an indication that you're heading down the wrong path. I actually could lose my job if I didn't report him. No regrets. Were people actually in the comments saying that? I don't get to see the comments with how these scripts are written out, but were people really saying that they shouldn't have reported the kid for selling drugs in a school? Like, I feel the very most you could push that sentiment is like, well, there's a time and place, so you should sell drugs not in school still. I don't think this is the teacher's fault, and yes, they are legally responsible for making sure this doesn't happen. Story 3. End of year, assessing students to see who'd progressed through to second year. While assessing the work, the department head came in and said we had to fail X amount due to facilities and resources for the next year. He then returned an hour later and said that due to the budget, we actually needed to pass a higher number than originally thought. I completely ignored what he'd said and carried on marking on merit, but it was the proverbial straw. Story 4. A student had a mental breakdown in the library, smashed a wooden chair, and gouged a pencil in his arm while screaming that he wanted us all to go away. I got reamed out for not calling campus security before I called 911. Edit. There are many good points about why on-site security should be called. Honestly, everyone should check with their institution and find out the protocols, but let your ethical and moral code guide you too. Frankly, I am glad I called 911 first, or this story would have a really bad ending. When the student gouged his arm, he must have hit something and blood started pulsing out of his arm. He inflated, I don't know how else to explain it, turned purple and screamed even louder. He took a step toward a student, looked at his arm again, fainted, smashed his face into a table corner, and started convulsing. The 911 dispatcher talked us through what we needed to do until the EMTs got here. The student survived and no one else was physically hurt. He sent a thank you card after he got out of the treatment program. On calling security first, I was never informed of that policy. None of the other staff/faculty who were trying to get the other students out or hidden in a staff room knew about the policy either. Others also called 911. The person who screamed at me for not following the chain of command was the person who was supposed to train all faculty and staff in the policy. Guess what? They didn't do that. The school did have a history of not reporting vandalism, car break-ins, and thefts to local law enforcement. I don't think that came into play with this event. I still second-guess myself about the events, but sometimes you can only do the best with what's in front of you. Story 5. I had a student who copied off another kid during a test. I gave him a 0. The parents came in to complain to administration that since I hadn't explicitly said during the first day orientation that cheating wasn't allowed, it was an unfair punishment. Administration forced me to allow him an opportunity to retake the test. He never retook it, and the grade of 0 stood. Still, I was so disillusioned by the entire experience that I started looking the next day at college programs that I could use to transition away from public education. This has to be the most actually thing I've ever heard about school stuff. Cheating is called cheating because you're not supposed to do it, because it's not allowed. If you could, it wouldn't be cheating. I feel like it just comes with the name. You don't have to be told cheating isn't allowed, right? You shouldn't. Story 6. I was a high school teacher with 7 years experience in my district and a master's degree. I was making $49,000. This was 2013. I was talking to a friend who was in from out of town. This friend had barely made it through his bachelor's degree, even with a lot of help from me and other friends. Over dinner, he was complaining about not getting a good enough raise, so he was making only $143,000 at his software consulting job. He didn't do the technical stuff, more customer relations. I left teaching to make more money. I am, but it has taken a while, and I really miss working with the kids. Wish I had stayed in teaching. Edit. To be clear, I don't begrudge my friend a penny. Good for people who do well. Story 7. Kid poured gasoline under the door of my room after hours and lit it, burning most of the room. The facility guys worked all weekend to clean it up and paint it, hauling in new desks to replace those burned. Not long after that, I found out I could make more money with less hassle by waiting at tables at the beach. Plus, the beach has women in bikinis. I was gone a week later. Story 8. 2 weeks into my first year teaching 9th grade math, I had a girl attack another girl for no reason in my class. She was grabbing onto her hair really tightly and I was trying to break it up. Another student tried to help me out and somehow the instigating student managed to punch him in the face and give him a bloody nose while still holding on to the other student's hair. Now what makes this story relevant is I literally said the words, "Screw this," while trying to break up the fight. Not loud, not to a student, but just like, "Screw this, I'm not gonna let this happen in my class right now." Well, the instigating student decided to tell the principal I was cursing at her. Despite the other students in the class supporting me and the fact that the student had a history of violence, I got a letter in my permanent file saying I had used inappropriate language towards a student. Screw that. Teaching taught me a lot, but I couldn't do it for more than a couple of years. Really respect those that make it their career. Story 9. Know a guy who graduated with a bachelor's in genetics or something? A hard science degree, basically. I also have a friend who cruised through college to get a degree in education, rarely studied, and basically would be that one person who would always want to go and have fun on the weekends, while the rest of us pulled hard study sessions every other day. Anywho, the guy with the genetics degree worked his butt off. I remember him spending all-nighters near finals when things really got hectic, such as needing to study for finals and needing to complete complex assignments. And he went off to work in a lab making $35,000 a year as a tech. He wants to move up and tells me the position right above him pays around $40K, but requires he work there for 1 to 2 years. The teacher friend got a signing bonus right out of college with a middle school and is making near $60K. She told us how the school pays a base salary of $50K to all teachers and gives bonuses depending on extra skills. She speaks Spanish. I know the whole bit is that teachers don't make enough money, and, well, it's true, they don't make enough. But I still think that, a geneticist could stand to make a little more. But also, I hear depending on where you live, teacher salaries aren't actually too bad anymore. Still the backbone of entire communities and absolutely should be paid their worth, but I hear it's getting better at least. Story 10. A female student I had disciplinary issues with accused me of hitting on her and making obscene gestures towards her. I'm an openly gay man, and most of the staff knew this. Yet the district still put me on suspension while they investigated. They were able to prove she was lying, but the district decided the best course of action was to transfer me to another school, instead of, punishing the student in any way. I quit at the end of the school year and got a job in banking. Story 11. I graduated from high school in 2010 in the US with the intent to be an English teacher. I'd had an English teacher my senior year who greatly inspired me, and I wanted to do the same thing for other kids as he had done for me. I went to college and aced all of my education major classes, became a favorite of a lot of my professors. More than one told me I'm going to be a great teacher and the industry is in good hands if there are more people like me in it. In my senior year of college, I did the student teaching placement. I didn't take any classes for a semester and instead was essentially a full-time teacher at the local high school. This gave me my first look at what apathy looks like. The students weren't even necessarily rowdy or disrespectful. Some were, but that happens anywhere. They were just broken. Many of them were 16 years old and reading at an elementary school level and had given up all hope of ever catching up. They saw no value in education, simply resigned to the fact that it was being presented a question and then figuring out what answer to plug into the blank. Somehow the actual growth part had been lost on them. My cooperating teacher didn't seem to care. He spent most of this time working through the easiest grad school program he could find so he could get more money out of the district, and most of his lessons involved showing a video and asking the students questions about it. He did his job, but the passion seemed to almost be entirely gone. But I graduated. That was a bad school district in a bad neighborhood. Of course it was going to have problems. If I got a job at a better district, I'd have more support and more options for handling problem students. My first job out of college was a part-time teaching aide at one of the largest districts in Pennsylvania. Every full-time teaching job wouldn't give me the time of day because I didn't have any experience. This was the only place I got an interview. My job was to meet with students who were having difficulties with their reading assignments, mostly ELL and special ed students, and give them some extra time to work things out. Surely this would mean I'd have a structured schedule with quality time spent around students. It turned out this school district was so disorganized, it felt more like I was a salesman trying to book clients to keep the work alive. The school was so large that 95% of the faculty had no idea I existed, so I needed to go out and find students who needed help instead of having them referred to me. The bizarre schedule, everything worked on a 6-day cycle, meant students frequently forgot about our appointments or came at the wrong time, and I had little to no means of hunting them down. The job quickly devolved into me sitting in a small room for 8 hours a day, seeing maybe one student. The one consistent student I had was a Bangladeshi girl who'd recently come to America. Her English was pretty good, but she was illiterate in her own native tongue, saying nothing of her ability to read or write in English. She was in a foster home after CPS took her away from her family, who would, quote, sit around and watch her father beat her like they were gathering around to watch television. At 14, she had a husband back in Bangladesh. When I checked in after leaving that position, my colleagues told me she had gone back to her home country to visit over the summer and then never returned. My wife was also unhappy with her job at the time, so we jointly decided we needed a change and moved cross-country. I got a full-time job at a high school in the Seattle area, one with supportive administration, interesting colleagues, and a strong amount of support for new teachers. I finally had my own classroom, a curriculum to teach, and a chance to start my career. Surely things were looking up. For the most part, things were actually pretty good. The coworkers in my department were supportive and uplifting, and my opinion was valued even though I didn't have as much experience as the others. Our administrator was a pretty cool guy, and I met some students who will keep with me forever. I honestly did enjoy working there, even if it was difficult sometimes. The mentality of the American high schooler right now is an incredibly toxic one. They've been sold this idea that they need a perfect 4.0 GPA and extracurriculars and a good ACT/SAT score if they want to get into a good college. And that if they don't get into a good college, they may as well sign up to work at McDonald's and set up shop in their parents' basement, because they are failures who will amount to nothing. This created a strict dichotomy of students, part of which who were halfway to an ulcer by the end of 9th grade because they were convinced they needed to be perfect, and students who knew they couldn't do that, so they gave up and started doing drugs at 14. I did my best to get through to them, but so many of them had given up on the system that even if I could reach them, their response would still be, okay, OP, you're cool, but that doesn't change the way the world works. It was honestly heartbreaking. The administrative side wasn't much better. They all honestly meant well, but the end result was a bit of a mess. Our, quote, instructional experts were a bunch of people who had either never taught in a classroom or were promoted up to get them out of said classroom due to poor performance. Yes, the people who were technically our bosses empirically had no idea what they were doing. The new teacher support meetings that I went to every month were 75% pointless team building exercises when I was already late getting home to my wife and struggling to succeed in the classroom. My principal only got my name right once in the whole school year. The administration was also pushing something called Running Start, which is basically a program where students start attending community college classes in their junior year, getting a head start on college credits. It's a great program for the kinds of kids who can handle it, but it was being marketed as easier, cheaper, and faster. We literally had advertisements during our morning announcements that said, I would recommend Running Start to anybody. This caused a stampede of students leaving for something that they're told will be easier and faster. The administration was puzzled as to why their enrollment numbers were hemorrhaging. The thing that some people don't realize about the first year of teaching is that it's simply survival. You are laying down the railroad track as the train is moving, and simply making it to the end of the line without a fiery crash is considered a massive success. Each year it gets easier and easier until eventually you have established enough of a framework that you can breathe. The first few years are something to grit your teeth through. So when the principal walked into my classroom one day after school and told me, hey, our enrollment numbers are down and we can't keep another full-time English teacher on board, so we're involuntarily transferring you to 7th grade. My stomach dropped. All of the hard work, late nights, hour-long crying fits curled in a ball on the couch were for nothing. Any semblance of framework I'd set up this past year would immediately be blown to dust, and I'd essentially have to start over at a new school, teaching a group I had no desire to be around for 8 hours a day. My first instinct was to tell him, "Screw you, I quit," right there and then. I almost did. I collected myself, though, and informed him I would be looking for employment elsewhere, and he seemed puzzled but understood. After, quote, thinking about it for a few weeks, I realized that this wasn't a district I wanted to be in no matter what, and tendered my resignation. All of my coworkers were jumping to give me recommendations, told me they were sure I would find something. After all, I had a year of experience under my belt now. Surely that would give me more leads than I had last year. It did not. I had a handful of interviews, but nothing ever materialized. I ended up as a substitute teacher in my local school district. A dog with a sign around its neck could have done my job, as most teachers rightly assume their sub might be an idiot and keep the lesson as autopilot as possible. Spring rolled around again, and I felt defeated. But I wanted to give it one last shot. There was a place the previous spring that seemed like a great fit, and I'd made a good impression. They told me it had come down to me and one other guy, but the other guy had more experience. I was strongly encouraged to apply again. Lo and behold, they had an opening this year for an English teacher. I applied, and even emailed my old interviewer to let him know. He said they would definitely keep me in mind once interview time rolled around. Several weeks later, though, I get an automated email informing me the position was closed. No interview, no phone call, not even an email. I thought I would be heartbroken, but it was more of a crystallizing moment for me. I hate the teaching profession. I love teaching. Working with young people, helping shape their ideas of the world and seeing them grow gives me a special kind of joy I'll always cherish. But the industry built around it is toxic and hostile to newcomers. I hate everything about how it functions, shooting itself in the foot and then crying when it hurts. It's a doomed profession, and I tell everyone I meet not to do it. I have since pivoted to use my degree for a career in technical writing. It's not perfect, but at the end of the day, I get to go home without worrying about grading or planning. Leaving teaching was the best thing I've ever done for my health. OP, in my mind, struck exactly why this is an issue without even knowing it, I think. They said the industry built around it is toxic. The fact that there's an industry at all is a problem, in my opinion. Every child should learn. It is, in my opinion, a right. When a right combines with an industry, things go horribly, horribly wrong. OP seems like they could do incredible, incredible things. They could inspire so many students to want to either do the same thing or reach their dreams, whatever they may be. Instead, OP will never get the chance to do that because the industry effectively pushed them out, and that just sucks. The world desperately needs more teachers like OP, and yet schools just keep pushing them away. Story 12. I had a religion teacher in high school named Mr. Nguyen, who was working on becoming a Jesuit priest and was a really cool guy. There was a kid in my class who was an annoying smart aleck, but Mr. Nguyen was always really patient with him, until one day he pushed him too far. I forgot exactly what the kid said, but it definitely crossed the line. Mr. Nguyen slammed his fists on the desk and shouted, "Why can't you ever shut the hell up?" He then picked up his stapler, chucked it at the kid, missing his head by a few inches, leaving a huge dent in the wall, and then stormed out into the hallway. There was another religion teacher down the hall who heard the commotion and talked to Mr. Nguyen in the hall for a while to calm him down. He didn't give up on teaching, but it was a pretty extreme screw this moment I witnessed. Story 13. I was invited to apply for another job. There is this feeling among professors that though our jobs feel insufferably exhausting and stressful sometimes, that it is the best possible job anyone could have, and we should be nothing but thankful that we have them. I guess that's what keeps us going through all the bull crap. Recently, someone invited me to apply for a directorship at another institution, meaning I would move up several ranks and direct a research program and facility. While I was being told about this job, I was like, let me get this straight. I never have to teach again. All my research will be done with and by a large team of enthusiastic, well-paid, trained professionals rather than itinerant, underpaid grad students and postdocs that I have to recruit and train every year. I never have to write another grant, and you'll pay me twice as much as I make now? This completely broke the spell. I realized that being a professor on balance is actually a horrible job in a lot of ways. I think it is just so hard to get a job in academia, we brainwash ourselves that it is the best thing ever to go through the whole long, humiliating process. We know about these other jobs, but the buzz is that you are paid well and highly respected, but in turn you sell your intellectual soul, so you should never want them. But it's just not true. There are some great jobs out there where you can still be a scholar, an even more productive and effective one in my case, and not have to deal with the other crap. Edit. A lot of people are reading this and think I hate teaching, which I guess is understandable, and I don't. I love it, and I think most professors do. What I don't love is having to do the work to run a research program, recruitment, mentoring, grant writing, fund management, personnel management, manuscript preparation, manuscript reviews, and of course, actual research, along with the work of designing and teaching courses. Teaching is not just time-consuming, it can be very taxing on your mental energies as well. What I don't like is having 2 full-time jobs at the same time. So if I can only do one, that's super. Edit 2. I'm getting a lot of requests for career advice concerning going into academia. Here's one of my responses below that I think applies to what many people want to know. If you want to go into academia, I say go for it. Don't drink the Kool-Aid about how being a professor is the chosen glory path, or the other Kool-Aid about how it's all a miserable rat race. A lot of how your academic career goes is how you will define it. If you love teaching, you can find yourself at an institution that emphasizes that. Conversely, if you prefer research, go to one that leans that way. If you hate writing grants, you'll find less expensive research to do. There are many ways to have an academic career. Go in with your eyes open and ready to form your career as you need it to go. The only rule, I think, is that you have to work very hard to succeed. But the good news is that hard work pays off much more regularly than in other instances, I find. And by hard work, I don't just mean effort, I mean results. But if you get the results, even if they aren't something huge and earth-shattering, doors will open for you. At some point, you may decide that you don't love what you do enough to justify all that hard work, and that's understandable. You can then look for a new path. Story 14. I was a student teacher, had my degree, got my license. My heart wasn't in it after student teaching. Wasn't the kids, you just have to realize they're teenage idiots. I had 11th graders. It was the parents and the administration. The parents who refuse to raise their own kids and the administration that doesn't back you up and holds you accountable for borderline unteachable kids. I remember 2 particular issues. First, all inclusion. It's the new-ish movement away from special ed and toward having everyone in the same classroom. All kids don't belong in the same freaking classroom because, Jesus freaking Christ, some kids are brilliant at school and some aren't. It isn't their fault, it's reality. I had one girl who busted her butt in my class and couldn't manage better than a 60 average. I had to give her a curve due to the effort or fail her. She didn't deserve that. She just needed to be in a lower level class. I had 2 kids who barely had a command of the English language. One was a girl who was brilliant. She was originally from North Korea. Would have loved the backstory, but again didn't communicate well and just couldn't cope. It's one thing to speak English well. It's another to understand nuances and so forth. History is a female dog to teach when someone's not proficient in English. Poor girl was pulling down hundreds on tests in calculus and D's in my class. And I had another kid who somehow ended up here from French Guiana in South America. Apparently it took them a while just to figure out what language he even spoke before deciding he could hack a college prep history class. Turned out about as well as you would expect. Secondly, the aforementioned parents. There's a growing entitlement from parents that I don't understand. They don't get why their kids can't pass or get A's. I don't know. Show some interest outside of the day report cards come out. You only hear from these parents several times a year, and only to explain that little Billy barely turned in crap and failed several tests. Despite the fact this is all online and readily accessible. My final straw was probably the parent who said point blank to myself and my mentor teacher that we, quote, are doing a terrible job at raising my daughter. The administration follows up on these things to determine resolutions and doesn't listen to reason, because there always has to be a scapegoat that isn't them. I was pretty half-hearted about the whole endeavor after that. Did 2 interviews, got a couple of callbacks, and said, screw it, and went into banking. Edit. Please note my experience relates to secondary education and specifically high school. I believe that this approach may have better results in the primary grades. I would also put out there that if you have a kid who has, say, dyslexia, but has had years of assistance and management with this disability, inclusion is perfectly fine. I'm talking about the abhorrent practice of taking kids in situations who are, say, brand new ESL students, or who have severe intellectual issues, and just saying, oh, they'll do well. That's ridiculous. I'm also talking about students who have a decade of results showing that they need basic level classes and sticking them in college prep or honors classes, often because mommy thinks her baby is super smart and can handle honors classes, and the administration won't push back and say no. I fully agree. Standardized teaching in general is just a garbage practice, doesn't make any sense. People are different, what a surprise. And while I understand that that's harder to accommodate sometimes, hey, fair enough. I know teachers, you guys don't have the resources. But lower level classes for situations like OP outlined are just a great idea, and not something you necessarily have to allocate more resources to. You are already running lower level classes just for younger students. I guess there's a whole stigma that would come along with attending classes with lower grades and all that, but it's really just where people are at in certain fields, and it's, as OP said, not their fault. It's just the way it is, and it would benefit them more to be met at their level instead of having all this stuff thrown at them. Anyway, I'm not a teacher, and I can't say how to fix it because I'm sure there are things I'm not considering. But OP, I feel your point very strongly. Story 15. I was teaching middle school English while overseas in Europe when two students, a boy and a girl, began viciously fighting after the boy made comments about the girl's mother. For most people, this would be easy to break up. But as a 5'5" manlet, both the 13-year-old kids had several inches and pounds on me. When I positioned myself in between them, they took a break from fighting each other to work as a team to push me over a desk, then promptly resumed punching each other's lights out. I quit that week. Story 16. I was subbing for a class that integrated some of these special education students for 2 hours a day. We were having a holiday party, so the kids got to push their desks together and have snacks and watch a movie. I'm sitting at the desk grading papers when I hear the class getting kind of noisy. I ask what's going on, and someone mentions that Trevor doesn't like this part of the movie. Trevor is a 12-year-old boy on the autism spectrum. He is a very large boy, about 6 foot and well over 200 pounds. I tell Trevor to come on over to my desk, and he does. He says he doesn't like it when people sing in movies and starts covering his ears. I tell him I will fast forward this part, and he flips his crap. Apparently he hates fast forwarding more than he hates singing in movies. He picks up a desk and whips it against the wall near a set of windows, flips over every desk he can get his hands on, all while screaming like someone is attacking him. He is just trashing the room and starts going after other kids. I yell for one of the kids to run and get his main teacher and another to get the principal. Trevor pushes a few kids hard enough to make them fall down and then grabs a girl by the throat and starts choking her. He has a look on his face of a madman, and he's sweating profusely and turning red while this girl is trying to fight him off. I get over there and I'm able to pry his hands off with the help of a few students. Trevor then turns to me and in a crazy deep voice says that he'll find my house, hide under my bed until I come home, and then murder me and laugh while doing it. His teacher came in and was able to pull him away, and Trevor just stared at me the entire way out, laughing like crazy. It was scary as hell. Story 17. Mother and father were teachers. For mother, when a parent, dad, tried to punch her in the face because his son had to repeat the year. The kid was a disaster and put zero effort in class. Later, someone scratched her car, put stickers on it, and wrote slurs with liquid paper on the windows. She asked for anticipated retirement after this. For father, a male teacher coworker told him they should fix their problems with punches outside. Father is not small, so he stood above him and told him, "Okay, let's go." The other suddenly did not want to keep going. In the same day, a mother came because her son was not doing well, and she tried to seduce him. For both, not as a teacher, but in a particular school. When a male coworker told father they should have a private party and, "If you behave," mother's name, "we will invite you," father told him he was out of place and began looking for other schools to teach. And also for both, too much work, stress and problems, too little pay and benefits, to the point where they had to wait half an hour to talk when they came back home before interacting with anyone. Story 18. I have two. Early in my career, I had students who were plagiarizing lab reports. I turned them in, mostly because I felt I had to. The school made a huge freaking deal about cheating and had an academic honesty pledge statement students wrote on every test. One set of parents screamed at me over the phone. Next thing I know, I have a meeting with the vice principal who said they didn't want the cheating to interfere with the students' future, and he ripped up all the plagiarism reports I wrote that year. My second time saying screw this was based on the cumulative effect of being unsupported by the school. They changed which courses I was teaching and the grade level. We had a construction project going on, so there was constant noise, including beeping and drilling, even when they promised it wouldn't be during the school day. That was a lie. Stupid school-wide initiatives, more pointless meetings, incompetent higher-ups. It's the adults in the system that make it hard to be a teacher. The kids, generally, not the problem. Story 19. I left during the first month in a spring semester at a poor rural high school. It was my first year teaching. Went from professional life to teaching through a state program. Absolutely no support from the administration. One class had over 30 students. Another had half the class as troublemakers who would not calm down. had a bomb threat, a gun found on a kid, a student death, and a teacher fired for an inappropriate relationship with a student, all before Thanksgiving. A quarter of the teaching staff was new. 2 people in my department had already left. Several teachers had already quit, and the interim principal and administration were refusing to help teachers with anything and actually blamed us. I'm trying to hang on. I'm hating every day of my life, and I'm thinking that all I need to do is make it through 1 year and I can do something else. Then early February, the principal calls me in and tells me that he thinks I'm not a good fit, and at the end of the year, I will need to go to another school or I will be terminated. In the real world, you don't tell someone you're fired but stay on for a few more months and then expect them to stick around. I was out of there and thankful for it, although it hurt to abandon my fellow teachers and the students. Also, I had won Teacher of the Month during the fall semester, so I couldn't have been that bad. They had done this because I refused to fill out a slip of paper indicating that I would stay on for next year. Story 20. The exact moment I decided that I wanted nothing to do with teaching anymore was when I was teaching a summer college class in differential equations while I was in graduate school. Most students are pretty checked out of mathematics by that point in their academic career, and summer classes were the worst for student ennui. The day before each test, we would go over topics and example problems that, quote, might be on the test. I told them that the questions on the test would be very similar to each and every example I was giving. I actually gave them every problem on the test verbatim. The students were also allowed an entire sheet of paper to use on the test. The average was 55. I gave them the answers to the test and practically told them so, and the average was still a failing grade. Screw teaching these ungrateful morons. I'm not going to give any input on how true I think this is or whatever, but I do think it is hilarious the difference between this one and like every other one. It was like, oh, the administration sucks, the students aren't getting the resources they need. This guy's just straight up, no. I hate these guys. I don't know if they're right for it. I don't know if they're wrong for it, but it is just very funny. Story 21. I worked at an elementary school as a paraprofessional. We had a 9-year-old psychopath. The day he was kicked out / pulled out by mom was the best day of that year. The whole year in general sucked. We had 13 kids and only 2 head teachers, plus 2 paras, including myself. We had that psycho kid to deal with, as well as several other highly behavioral kids. We had one of the head teachers leave on maternity and to leave no plans. The other para quit unexpectedly. I was so stressed that I was losing weight and my hair. I was experiencing other health problems with my monthly cycle to the point I almost passed out due to blood loss 1 month. When my husband's grandmother died, I was given grief about asking for a day off for her funeral. We hired another para 3 months after the first one left. We had subs filling in and she was awful. Everything that went wrong, I was blamed for. A kid threw a book at my back and caused a bruise on my spine. And by the end of April, I turned in my 2-week notice. I felt no guilt. Story 22. Still a teacher here, but very nearly left the profession. During my EPD, Early Professional Development year, which here in Northern Ireland is your first year of teaching, I was hired by a school with a really rough reputation. Started in September and was given some of the toughest classes in the school, which I thought was a valuable learning experience, even though it was really difficult. Principal called me into her office in November to tell me she thought I was a terrible teacher, and that she regretted ever hiring me. Direct quotes, by the way. Was given no constructive feedback or advice, then was thrown back into the classroom for the rest of the day. Had no choice but to stay there, as teaching jobs here are so few and far between. But this situation repeated itself in March, with her then telling me that I would never be a good teacher, and that I'd be doing the education system a favor if I quit and went back to working in the shop where I used to work. Also told me then that she advertised my position and replaced me for the following school year without my prior knowledge. Then avoided her until June, when my classes sat their exams. GCSE class got 100% A star to C. Other classes did remarkably well. She had the nerve to offer me a reference on my last day, and I told her she could shove it up her butt. In another school now and so much happier. Have support of an amazing principal who regularly checks in and is impressed with the work I'm doing with my classes. Glad I stuck with it. Story 23. Not sure if this qualifies, but I was an English teacher in China. I taught kindergarten and the little emperor syndrome really is a thing. The little boys in the class were total craps, and the regular classroom teachers gave exactly 0 craps in restraining them, though I saw a little girl get slapped for acting up. My breaking point was when I was in front of the class teaching and one little boy was running around in a circle right in front of me. I was ignoring him, but then he started slapping me really hard in the legs every time he went past me. On about the 6th circle, he wound his arm up to slap me and I just nailed him. Full on 2-handed shove. The kid went flying. skidded across the floor looking pretty stunned, though didn't cry. Then the teachers took it upon themselves to come over and give him crap. They made him apologize and sit back down. At that point, I figured I'm literally assaulting 6-year-olds. Probably best I left the country. I left with 3 months still on my contract, but no regrets. Story 24. I work and teach in higher ed. I still teach online and had a student a few semesters ago who did hardly any work but asked for an exemption from all the work she didn't do. I had to reply and confirm she was asking for a passing grade for doing no work, because I thought I was reading it wrong. There's an amazing amount of student entitlement I didn't see 10 years ago. Sort of like, I pay for a passing grade in this course, instead of, I pay for access to college-level content. I think all the really great free resources online have changed the way they look at learning, and we haven't kept up. A bit off topic, but I've recently been spending time at my kid's elementary school setting him up with an IEP. Just working with the staff and watching how fast-paced it is really surprised me. I'd be in a meeting and suddenly a walkie would go off, and they'd have to go out and handle a student issue, and then come back to me. And that switching gears process is non-stop. And this might just be because I live in a relatively small town, but it seems like every teacher and staff member knows every kid's name and really seems to care. After spending years working with the doctors trying to help my kid, it's the people at his school who've dramatically changed his and our life in just a few months. I know I couldn't do the work they do, and we will be forever indebted to them for their intervention. Story 25. My wife is a teacher. She started in the UK public sector but left after 8 years. After a few months' break, she went into private education. There wasn't any one thing that led her to quit. It was working in a system that over 8 years saw 3 curriculum changes, 2 exam changes, and 3 changes to the inspection process. A system that demanded more and more from the staff while cutting funding and freezing pay, where she would get to work at 7 a.m. and leave at 6 p.m., do some work at home, and spend almost every Sunday marking or planning or both just to keep afloat. A system that was constantly narrowing its scope and becoming ever more inflexible, to the detriment of the children she was teaching, where her choice was either to teach her students to pass the exam but deprive them of useful mathematical knowledge and critical thinking skills, or to teach them these skills but run the risk of them doing poorly in their exams. This would jeopardize not only those kids but future pupils as well, because poor exam results would bring the school's rating down, leaving it open to be taken over by an academy chain which would be even worse. It was a system that took an enthusiastic and excellent teacher, ground her down, and stretched her so thin she basically had a breakdown and almost left teaching. Story 26. I was an adjunct at the bottom of the totem pole and got my class assignments last, and only if the more senior people, everyone, had gotten their minimum number of classes. They'd hold off on this until the literal last minute, and I would find out if I were teaching 3 days before the semester started. For the last 2 or 3 years, I was only teaching online and only in the summer. During that time, I moved away and started a business, so it was all fine with me. The last summer, I got 2 classes I'd never taught before, with about a month before they started. I had to learn a totally new subject for one, and remember stuff I hadn't looked at since grad school for the other. They almost took a class away from me after I'd busted my butt to prepare for it, because nobody else's classes were filling up. The other class had 6 people in it. I was told I could teach it prorated, for 6/11ths of the usual rate, and I refused. I didn't have time to learn that stuff, teach 2 classes, and keep my business going. Story 27. During my student teaching, I was at parent-teacher conferences. I was speaking to a parent whose son was failing, mostly because he did none of the homework. She was angry with me and pretty much told me it was my fault. She asked why I wasn't making sure he did it. I said, it's homework, meaning work you do at home. It's your responsibility to help him and make sure he does it. She complained about me to the teacher I was student teaching for. He warned me that teaching is very political, and that parents can keep you from getting tenure or get you fired. Other teachers told me this was the climate nowadays. Children are not held accountable, and parents blame you for their lack of parenting. I decided that it was not worth it to finish the teaching program, so I finished early with a degree in history and poli-sci, the subjects I would have taught. My degree is pretty much useless, but I still make more than a teacher does. Story 28. I was a substitute teacher working on becoming a real teacher. I was a regular sub for this class of 2nd grade or maybe 1st grade kids. I'm not really sure how to put this into words. I couldn't watch good kids get ruined by their parents. There were 4 or 5 kids I can think of, but I only remember 2 of their names, Isaac and Felix. Both of them were constantly in trouble. Felix, because he didn't pay attention and drifted from one thing to the next, almost certainly an intellectual or learning disability at play, and Isaac because he was constantly acting out for attention. Now, did I have to get on these kids 50 times over the same crap? Yes. Did they kind of drive me crazy? Yeah. But They were good kids. Felix was the sweetest little boy. He distracted all the kids around him, but he distracted them by being nice to them. He'd just start chatting with them and seeing how they were and stuff. It was actually really endearing, but not helpful when little Billy is supposed to be doing his math. Isaac was less pleasant, but he was a smart kid. He did stupid crap because it made other kids laugh. He was a decent kid, and if I stopped him, took him aside and said, "Look, you know you can't act like this. What's your deal?" He would just say, "I don't know." And I'd say, "Listen, I know you can be good and behave well. I've seen you do it. How about you behave yourself for me today so I can tell your teacher how good you've been?" He'd brighten up and look happy, and for a few hours he'd be as well behaved as I could ask for. Eventually he'd do some new stupid thing and I'd give him a look. He would just kind of grin bashfully and stop. But every time I saw these kids, I had to start from scratch again. Their mothers were addicts, and I don't know if they had fathers in the picture at all. Felix. We were supposed to wait with the kids until their parents came and got them. On multiple occasions, Felix's mother was hours late. Hours. These kids get out at 2 p.m. and I'm there until 5, waiting for this lady who rolls up in pajamas with her hair crazy and no makeup on. Like, girl, what the hell have you been doing all day besides not taking care of your kid? Isaac, at least his mom came and got him on time, but as soon as she was with him, she would nitpick and peck at him about everything. "Why are you smiling like that?" "No reason." "Well, stop making stupid faces." What the hell, lady? No wonder your kid acts like a terror in class. Over the course of a year, I watched them both get worse and worse, and I couldn't do anything about it. Talked about them with the teacher, and she felt the same way. Had made some formal complaints about the parents, but nothing came of it. After that, I couldn't do it. I work in higher education now in a non-teaching position. I still watch people fail without being able to help them sometimes, but I can help them more directly now than I could have before. I couldn't watch that happen year after year with a new batch of kids each time. Screw that. It makes my heart ache. Story 29. I taught at an inner-city school. I loved working there and the kids were fantastic, even though they had a rough go in life. I felt like I was making a difference in their lives. What caused me to say screw this? Well, several small things leading up to one glaring problem. A. Teacher in the classroom next to me was diabetic in her late 60s, early 70s. Still teaching. She would fall asleep in class quite often. If a student woke her up or asked to learn something, she would call them to her desk, pick up whatever she had nearby, and hit them or beat them with the item. Sometimes it was a stapler, sometimes a book, it varied. We had a window between our two rooms, so I saw into her classroom quite often and witnessed this myself. B. I called in the said hitting of students to the principal and she told me to drop it. I called further up the chain. I was also told to drop it or face consequences. This older teacher had blackmail on pretty much everyone and was a long-standing member of the teachers' union. They were all afraid of her. C. I was asked at one point to change my grades to bring up the scores for the school. When I refused, I found out that they went in after I submitted them and raised everyone's grade anyway. I had a number of fails, but suddenly everyone was passing. Again, I called up the chain to report it and was asked to drop it. D. I was told that since I was new and didn't grow up in the city I was teaching in, that I just didn't understand how things worked around here. The union was incredibly powerful and was told they were trying to find dirt on me to blackmail me. They couldn't find any though, and was told to wait. E. One day I saw the said teacher next to me screaming, actually get up from her desk for once, and start throwing things off her desk at the students. Some left bruises after the fact, and she physically hit them. I called it in finally. Principal refused to take action or stop it. I told her I would call the police next time I witnessed it and would make a statement everyone was trying to cover it up and go to the news next. Was told I would, quote, regret saying that. F. I was asked to stay another year and commended for my teaching and for being a role model. I had signed on to teach summer school, which was also my income for the summer months, as we only got paid for the months we teach. Some school districts will take your yearly salary and evenly divide it over the 12 months, and not this one. I was on my own for the summer. A week before I was due to start, I had a full class roster, and told my summer class was very popular. 3 days before, I was called up and told my class was canceled due to no interest. What happened was the teacher who beat her students and the union finally got their revenge and decided to show me who was boss. I decided that day I had enough. I walked into the school, quietly gathered up my personal effects from the classroom, and dropped my keys off with the school secretary. I told her I was driving to the main building and quitting, and I was done. The school secretary told me she's seen all the good teachers go because of the bullying by this one teacher and the teachers' union. She wished me well. I went into the main building and filled out my paperwork. I was told I was the 6th teacher to quit just that day. I called up my parents that evening and asked if I could move back in with them while I looked for another job, even though I didn't want to. I did some substitute teaching work work here and there while I was looking for a full-time job in a non-teaching profession, but I was done. I really loved teaching and working with the kids and making a difference, but I have zero love for the teachers' union. Story 30. My wife got contacted about applying for a job out of state. I encouraged her to do so. My thoughts were, I have a year and a half of teaching experience and a master's degree in teaching from an R1 research institution. This will be easy. It was not easy. I was told I could not teach in the subject that I was fully certified and held a degree in my current state, despite reading stories about shortages and emergency certifications in my field, but I could probably make it work in another field if I took 6 or 7 classes. I now work another job that I don't really like, though I can get those 6 or 7 classes for mostly free if I want them. The problem is starting over as a teacher again would be a decent-sized pay cut, and trying to convince myself to deal with the overall low societal respect for teachers is tough when the whole process has just exacerbated my depression for 3 years. Story 31. I started teaching in 2008 when everything went to hell. I skipped student teaching and was hired as an intern, got fabulous reviews, was loved by the kids and admin, and found out mid-March I was being laid off with about 150 other teachers in the district. Got rehired 2 weeks into the next school year, even though they knew about the position for the entire summer. This was at a different school, though. Did great there. Got their computer-based instruction class up and running while still teaching English. Got laid off that March again. It broke my heart, and they once again offered me another different school that was an absolute hellhole. I left and worked other jobs for years, moved around, enjoyed my 20s, met my now husband, and came back to teaching. My old district happily hired me again and promptly laid me off again, then hired me on a temporary contract which was illegal, but my union was so worried about getting raises that year they didn't care or help. Finally got tenure in that district and ended up getting a job offer at a much better district and left. I've been teaching 7 years, and only one of those years I didn't have to completely take down my classroom at the end of the school year. Luckily, my new district does everything it can to not have to lay off, and I just got my tenure. Story 32. For me, I quit because I was stuck teaching kids stuff like the various parts of a plant cell or concepts of trigonometry, and many of them couldn't do things like tie their shoelaces, tell the time on a clock, work with other people as a team. These were 14-year-old kids with no life skills at all, and I was being asked to teach them things which would be completely meaningless to them, instead of anything they might actually learn from. I know that some kids need to learn the higher level stuff, science type stuff, whatever, but I genuinely believe that for many kids, school is just not the answer. I've done a load of other youth work type stuff, and they can learn so much more by doing a project or something than they ever will in school. It made me so sad I had to leave education altogether. Story 33. I was in college to become a teacher for all of a single semester. I volunteered to tutor local high school students since everyone in the School of Education seemed to be of the opinion that it's a great idea to get actual teaching experience as soon as possible. And boy, they were right. The first day I go in, I'm paired up with a middle schooler who needs algebra help. 3 parentheses x minus 7 close parentheses equals 27. Solve for x kind of stuff. Super basic. So I start explaining how you can treat both sides of an equation as expressions of a single number, which means that you can perform operations on both sides without invalidating the inequality, and he just stares at me saying nothing. So I kind of start working through a problem for him. Given the equation above, I would have said we could divide both sides by 3, but he didn't even seem to understand that. So at that point, I'm trying to work through division with this kid, but he didn't even seem to remember how long division works. The hour goes by and we haven't even begun to solve a single problem before he puts his stuff away and leaves. It was at that point I realized that I didn't have the patience to teach the kids who either don't want to learn or have fallen so far behind that they lack the fundamentals necessary to handle their current material. I understand that some kids have tough home lives and learning disabilities and such, but that doesn't make it any less frustrating to communicate with someone who just won't or can't try to learn. Story 34. Might be an inevitable screw this in a week. I work with emotional/behavioral special ed kids in an elementary school. My one-to-one kid and I have grown a bond since I work with him for the whole school day, 5 days a week. We had a lockdown drill and he was hyperventilating and crying in the classroom in the minutes leading up to the announcement of the drill. The weight of the inevitable was just eating away at him. I spent nearly 45 minutes calming him down and keeping him quiet. Enter Jay, a real 4th grade jerk. Bullies other students, talks back to teachers, is rude to everyone. His parents think he's an angel child and never discipline him and blame the school. Well, Jay sees my student crying, walks right up to his face, and makes a crying boo-hoo face to mock him. Instinctively, I grabbed Jay by the sweater, pulled him into my face, and in the most stern voice told him to knock it off and get back to his seat. My student has a lot of anxiety issues, and seeing this student attack that made me snap. So now I have a meeting with the superintendent, special ed director, and God knows who else. Meanwhile, Jay continues to go unpunished and pretty sure his parents will get me fired. Parents ruin the teaching career. While I can't say I wholeheartedly endorse, putting your hands on a kid, I do understand the frustration mounting and needing to do something about it just blowing up. Do I think OP handled this the best they could? No. But do I understand their frustrations completely, and I don't necessarily want to see them fired? Yes. Story 35. Taught for 6 years in low-income schools and a nice public school. Every day and in almost every class, I had to use Jedi mind tricks to redirect and confront blatantly disrespectful students. It was difficult to balance modeling appropriate responses to disrespect, but also being the alpha male adult in the classroom. I felt like my job was becoming more and more about managing behavior and keeping track of records than it was about teaching. I was a really effective teacher, had good evaluations, and good at behavior management, but still not for me. My moment was realizing I was somewhat wound up before every class, every day, not knowing what to expect, and that I was not giving my best time and energy to my family at home as a result. All my energy was being spent on the kids. Also, it's becoming increasingly respectable to be blatantly disrespectful to others. Ironically, the same students are the most incapable to handle disrespect from others and the easiest to offend. Beyond the four walls of the classroom and into real life, they would get their butts beat. Story 36. For me, the biggest thing was the work environment. Not as bad as some I've read on here, but not having clear support from the boss while also having to deal with whiny coworkers. Yeah, 3 strikes led to me being okay with giving it up. 1. Was not informed I would have a co-teacher for recess, which was helpful, but at the same time, she's recovering from a brain injury and really shouldn't be working. She constantly steps on my toes while teaching, and I finally just said, you take care of everything. Strike 2 was when another teacher upset her daughter was struggling in a higher math class, told me I need to give lower grades to the students in the lower math class even if they earned an A. And the final strike was when I was running a camp, and the same teacher got upset that her daughter, who wasn't enrolled, was bored on day 1. She went to the boss, and the boss told me I wouldn't be running the camp anymore, and I lost out on $1,000. I have more, but those are the big 3. Story 37. Got to watch one in middle school. I went to a really crappy school system, where elementary and high school was just one long hallway with 2 gyms and graduating classes averaged 40. My science teacher in 5th grade was a devout evangelist pianist, skipped the evolution section, and was actively racist to the few brown and black kids in my class. One day I guess we got too loud and rowdy, or maybe the class before, because he put in the Sound of Music and repeat science class and delayed at the back of the room next to his desk on the floor. He cried quietly the whole hour. He quit and tunes pianos and preaches now. Screw him, by the way. My middle school also had a kid push over a 78-year-old substitute and break her hip. She quit, obviously, and teased their obese ex-principal, who had come back to substitute following leaving the school to take care of his cancer-afflicted wife, until he left permanently. Story 38. My wife moved from Michigan to North Carolina, the South, and worked in a school with 97% of students on the free/reduced lunch program. It was her first teaching job on her own, although she had spent nearly 5 years in the classroom while in school and prior to her first year teaching on her own. The build-up was very much like one of those movies where someone starts working with youth in the ghetto, and she does have some success stories. For example, her students had the highest science scores in the county, and although her students are now into young adulthood, many still reach out to her and thank her for being there for them. However, my wife was new to the very real racism that still exists in the South. She, being white-skinned and the principal being black-skinned, had for some reason caused her principal to single her out and butt heads on many occasions. While in a meeting with the principal one day, her principal told my wife that she didn't understand the kids in the school because sometimes they just need some of this, pointing to her own skin color. It was during her first year on her own that my wife lost faith in the education system. Not only was her principal extremely racist, the school and perhaps the county had a policy where no child could receive less than a 60% grade, even if they didn't do any work. It was a systematic failure of our youth in America, bold-faced, and very much not long ago. Later, it turned out the principal was involved in some kind of embezzlement-type scam involving the local university's fraternity/sorority crowd, both of which required dark skin to be a part of. There was a professor of the university that wrote textbooks, and all of the principals in this buddy-buddy group would purchase way more textbook materials from the university professor than they would ever use. I remember when my wife first arrived at her first teaching school, she had carts upon carts of these books brought in as resources, way more than she had students. We didn't realize at the time, and not until years later, that this scam was going on. All of this is aside from the normal Common Core, no child, and regular stuff that all teachers have to deal with these days. To this day, my wife refuses to participate in the public education system. She finds her ways to stay a teacher and participate in the learning process. She will always be a very caring and compassionate teacher, and for that, I am glad. Story 39. I'm a teacher in New York City, one of the better states/larger cities to be a teacher in. My salary isn't glamorous, but it's livable. If I worked a normal 40-hour work week, I would make about $40 an hour, but I'm expected to be at school, teaching or somehow managing groups of children for 9.5 hours a day, and on average, I spend another 15 hours each week lesson planning or grading. Even putting in 65 hours a week, and I know some who work a lot more, the job is designed to be impossible. Hear me. Here in the United States, those that make educational laws are absolutely terrified of a meritocracy. They do not want most children to receive a quality education. So they give you an impossible number of children to teach and an impossible amount of curriculum to cover. Instead of working to make class sizes smaller, they demand that you spend your own time and money earning more and more degrees. The kids can feel that something is wrong, that they're being denied access to a good education, but they don't know how or where to focus that energy, and so they, and often their families, blame the teachers and take it out on us. Today is actually my last day teaching. I gave it my best for 6 years, and I just don't have another week in me. Honestly, I don't think my skill set is really geared toward teaching, and I've spent enough Saturdays writing lesson plans, only to get called a female dog for trying to implement them. I want to be better, but I just can't anymore. Story 40. I'm not a teacher/professor, but this is one of my favorite stories about a professor. I was in his philosophy class, cool dude. So we all show up for the final exam and he's very late. He rolls in, stinking of booze, probably in the clothes he wore the day before, looking like he just left the bar. It was an 8 or 10 a.m. final. He tells us, "So this quarter, I've been trying to buy a bar in this other city and managed to get it, but my wife didn't want me to. Last night, I was at the bar a little longer than I thought I would be, and when I got home, my wife had left me. So I didn't have time to make your final exam. Everyone gets an A, and screw this." He takes off his wedding ring, throws it in the trash, and stalks out of the classroom. One kid picked up the ring and I think tried to find the guy to give it back to him, while the rest of us sat there stunned. Sure enough, when grades came out, we all got A's. Well, dude's having a bit of a rough time. Hope he's doing better. Hope things are sorted out, whether that be through marriage counseling or divorce. And, hey, with any luck, he might be running a bar. Not gonna even think about what happens without that luck, though. Story 41. It only took me 18 months to wash out of teaching. The final straw was when the school decided they didn't want to hold back a student who had failed all of his classes the previous year. When I taught him for 6th grade my first year, he was a huge troublemaker, the kind who discipline couldn't touch, and who managed to rile up the entire class until they were practically unteachable. I mean, this kid did not give a crap about anything. There was even a rumor that he was selling his younger brother's body in the school bathroom, though no one could ever prove it. But he got held back after that year and was put into my class again, and he was really embarrassed that he didn't get to move on with his friends. He actually came to me that first day and said he really wanted to try to stay out of trouble this year. For 2 weeks, he was a model student. He asked insightful questions, came to me for help with work, snapped at other kids who were acting up and interrupting class, and they listened. He was basically a different person. Then, the school decided to bump him up to 7th grade with his friends after all. Overnight, he was back to being a little craphead, and managed to turn the otherwise well-behaved 7th grade class I was teaching into pure chaos in about 2 days. I quit a few weeks later. Consequences were never enforced for the students. The administration wouldn't back us, and it just wasn't worth the stress and frustration anymore. Obviously, this student wasn't the only thing, but he was the final straw. Story 42. I was a bad teacher. I didn't have the organization and perhaps social skills to be successful. One day after my coworker, who had no respect for me, came up with a scheme that turned one uncontrollable class, for me anyway, into 2.5, I was trying to get through a half day. I had been thrown off my rhythm enough to where I wasn't completely sure what to go over, so I made up a lesson plan that day that I thought I could get through. During this time, the school noticed how incompetent I had become and had 2 supervisors in the room watching me. Earlier in the week, one had been very active in helping me get control over the class, but today she and another supervisor were doing nothing but taking notes. It might have been because I got in a ton of trouble the day before for doing exactly what she told me to do because it conflicted with the lax culture of the school. I quickly lost control of my first class and could barely keep myself going. Then the assistant principal entered the room and saw what was going on. He pulled me out and questioned me as though I had no idea what I was teaching. I knew what personification was, or at least I thought I did, but he just made me feel stupid. After that, I did my best to power through the day and was in a meeting to figure out what my next step would be. I decided that everyone was better off without me, and decided that I would leave in an orderly fashion. That day is what broke me. Story 43. Not a teacher, but lamenting what I saw my professors go through. I have a bachelor's degree in craft and material studies. My goal had always been to attend graduate school and begin teaching in college afterwards. I'd say it's sort of a passion I found as an undergrad to teach people how to work with clay, but shortly after graduation, most of my professors started dropping like flies, absolutely fed up with how the college was treating them. One teacher was promised a promotion, but later it was given to another teacher that had richer friends. Another teacher was given grief over her maternity leave, etc. Most were working multiple jobs to make ends meet, still had their own student loans to worry about too, and were simply being treated like crap. And this was/is the top public art school in the country, and they were treating their teachers this way? I don't know what I want to do with my life anymore because of their struggles. It almost doesn't seem worth it, even with the passion I have. Now even more so after reading everyone's comments here. Most of my professors went above and beyond what was required of them. They were influential to who I am as an artist and person, and this was the same for many students. Not just me, yet they're treated so poorly. It's just not right. Story 44. Not a professor, but I imagine I witnessed that moment in one of my professors' lives. Had a kid in our linear algebra class that was off. Maybe autistic, not really sure, but some clear sort of disability. The professor was a nice guy. It was obvious he was passionate about the topics he was teaching us. But occasionally he could be real hard on us. His tests were an absolute female dog. Well, this kid would just say the dumbest crap all the time. The professor would ask a question and this kid would raise his hand and just go, 42? That wasn't an example, by the way. He would always say 42, despite it not being relevant to anything. Or he would just say for a minute straight and never come up with an answer. Sometimes the kid wouldn't even raise his hand, just go straight into doing that. He would sit on his phone all class with the volume on, playing some crappy mobile game. Despite his disability, everyone in the class just really disliked this kid for that. He would do it almost every class period at least once or twice. The professor quickly got sick of his crap and started telling him to just stop talking, /shut up, etc. after like the third Then one day the kid asked a legitimate question about something we were learning. The professor seemed pretty surprised, considering the kid never says anything relevant. The professor starts talking about it and turns back to the blackboard to write. Then after talking for a bit turns back and sees the kid on his phone again, not even listening. Oh man, that was an explosion. You're just gonna ask me a question and go back on your freaking phone? Are you freaking kidding me? I am so glad this semester is going to end in less than a month, so I never have to endure your company again. You are the absolute worst student I have ever had. Continued ranting on this kid for like a minute straight. Kid shut up real quick and started saying things like, I'm sorry, I'm such an idiot, I'm so stupid. And the professor just said, shut up and stop talking or get out of my class. Felt kind of bad for the kid because he clearly had some disability, but at the same time he should have been in a separate special education class. He does the same crap in all of his classes apparently. Still my favorite professor I ever had though. Story 45. Took over 137 7th graders for language arts. Their previous teacher was fired because over 60% of them were below a C average. No lesson plans, one 40-minute planning period a day, and a 22-minute lunch break. I worked my butt off to come up with lessons that would both engage the kids and teach them. Their grades and test scores bounced back pretty quickly, and the administration showed appreciation for about a month. Then, the complaints. Mandatory parent meetings. If a student has a D or worse, I had to meet with the parents. Then again if it hadn't improved in 2 weeks. I inherited like 80 of these students. Wasn't grading fast enough. I had a by next Monday rule, and would often give them Fridays to catch up on reading/homework while I graded. I was told I can't grade during class, and the school policy was 2 days after due date. I told them I can only grade so fast, and they only pay me for an hour after school ends. They told me teachers are expected to stay late to take care of responsibilities. Sudden leash tightening on my curriculum. Instead of Huck Finn and The Outsiders, I found short stories and graphic novels to get the material they could digest easier, and actually engage for homework. Also looked for non-white male protagonists to broaden their horizons. Parents started complaining about me preaching feminism and Islam because of some of the characters. I, by the way, am white, male, and Christian. Principal told me to just teach what the other teachers teach. Practice tests. Was told I didn't do enough, so I showed their improvement since I took over, and that it was thanks to them learning, not practicing a multiple choice. By this time, the principal was fed up with me and said to do it or I was fired. I responded she should go ahead. Start looking for my replacement. I'm not coming back next year. Story 46. Taught 8th grade math at a middle school in DPS, Denver. I caught 3 girls passing notes with very explicit lyrics and weed references. I called all 3 of their parents. The reason being, 2 of the girls were great students and falling in with the wrong crowd. The 3rd was a good kid at heart, but stopped giving any craps. I'd already previously talked to them, assigned detentions, talked to them again to no avail. The next day, the principal told me to stop calling kids parents. The girls told on me because they absolutely knew he would take their side. He was more interested in being cool than disciplining and looking out for kids. The principal also gave me a talking to for not letting a student who cussed me out while screaming back into the class until the student sat down and talked to me. Story 47. I haven't quit yet, so these would, at the moment, be classified as moments that have given me pause rather than screw this moments. As a uni teaching assistant, I've become a bit dismayed by the whole corporatization of the university. This takes the form of uni admins who refer to undergrads as BIUs, basic income units, in reports, and students who exclaim, "Do you know how much I'm paying in tuition?" when I respond like a human instead of a robot regarding their demands and expectations. Their frustration is understandable, see their classification as BIUs, but misdirected and disheartening. As a course instructor, I got the following advice. Note that I'm paid per course as an instructor. The first time that you teach a class, you'll barely survive it, and the hours you put in won't be worth what you earn. But then once you teach it again, you can just coast. I don't want to just survive and then coast. I want to have the resources to learn to instruct properly as a fledgling instructor, and then to keep the course updated and flexible based on the needs of different cohorts. Story 48. Didn't even make it to a full-time teaching gig. I have a degree in secondary education and a concentration in English. My student teaching period was one of the most difficult times of my life. My mentor teacher was a raging female dog who felt threatened by me and felt I was arrogant because I was ready to take over the class and the kids liked me more. She was overly strict about everything and did not pick her battles. Everything was a battle with the kids. Phones, grabbing things from their bags while she was talking, going to the restroom, light whispering as the class calmed down. She yelled at them about everything, so yeah, of course they'll like me better. The kids hated her, and my mentor teacher hated me. So she was rude and snarky and made passive-aggressive comments. If I brought up a concern, she always had something to say about how I should be handling it. Later on, the kids would ask me why I couldn't be their teacher instead. This woman made me so miserable and wouldn't lift a finger to help with the most menial tasks. Excuse me, I'm cutting out these name tags. If you're heading to the workroom, do you mind making 30 copies of these for me real quick?
You know, you'll have to do this yourself when you get a job.
Is the highlighter on your desk? I need to highlight a part of this student's essay.
You'll have to come get it.
It was like she actively tried to make everything harder for me out of spite. And all the other teachers liked her. She was department head and everyone looked up to her and turned to her for advice because she was the most senior of them. I finally made the choice to defy her after months of sticking to her strict standards on one of my last days there. We were reading Lord of the Flies as a class, and we'd done group circle reading aloud for almost a week straight so far, and I was bored with it, the kids were bored with it, and they liked the book, but I could see their interest fading fast. So I found an audiobook on YouTube and told the kids to sit anywhere. Anywhere? What do you mean, Miss OP? Anywhere. Wherever you're most comfortable. Wherever you can focus on reading and enjoying the book. I laid on the floor at the front of the class. Under the table? On top of the desks? Anywhere. You have 5 seconds to find a seat. And God, they loved it. My mentor teacher was so angry. She would never let them do such a thing. But it was harmless. They felt they had a decision in the matter. They could monitor their own behavior, and they were the most invested in the book I'd ever seen them. She moved to Peru after I left. Story 49. Not an ex-teacher yet, but it might be going there. I don't know if it was one particular moment, but this is really only my second real year of teaching. Technically third year, but one of those years was subbing with a couple of short leaves. My other 2 years are full year leave replacements. I'm getting burnt out already. I get no respect from students. I have to constantly tell them to stop talking, do their work, etc. And some of them talk to me like I'm an annoying sibling instead of their teacher. Every day is a battle. To make them do their work, stop talking when I'm talking, don't touch each other, put down my globe, put down his backpack, don't talk when you're taking a test. They don't give a crap about learning anything. They complain and moan every second of the day. They act like learning about the earth is the worst goddamn thing imaginable, and that me teaching them about hurricanes and weather fronts is actively making their lives worse. They'd rather just be jerks to each other and play Fortnite 24/7 instead of knowing anything. It's wearing me down little by little every day. At first, I thought I'd just gotten unlucky with bad classes. My first year was a crap show for quite a few reasons. But I'm in a new, better district and it's still the same problems. How can I teach a group of people that don't give a crap about anything except for their own self-absorbed lives? So no real screw this moment, just more of a constant horror that gets worse with every passing day. Story 50. Working for an American public school is so frustrating. You can't get funding for anything. They expect so much for so little pay and in such a little time. I was working on a small after-school venture in robotics. Just a few kids after school for a couple hours or so, basically just playing with mechanized Lego. I set it up that I could grade papers during the second half while the kids played. Supervisor told me I can't because I'm not focusing on the kids, but because my hours were so tight, I didn't have any other time to grade papers or make lesson plans or anything really. Everything you do is under the microscope, complicated and stressful, all for the same pay you'd get managing the produce section at your local grocery store. Something has to change. Teachers are patient by nature, but it's getting bad out there. I left the most stable adult job I've ever had with no other prospects because I just couldn't deal with it anymore. If anyone reads this, stand up for your local schools, even if you don't have kids. Be involved. Kids are the future, and greedy adults are ruining it. Story 51. Still teaching, but there was one place I decided not to go back to for a couple of reasons. This was a pretty big school for my country and was a more vocational school with students aged 16 to 19 becoming builders and mechanics and whatnot. 1. The principal must have been on some kind of psychedelic drugs or some crap because he was out of his freaking mind. Keep in mind, a lot of his staff was former typical blue-collar workers who, for various reasons, often medical, had to quit their original job, so their interests weren't exactly academic interests. Seems like he had some vision of educating his subordinates and inspiring us all by reading freaking poetry between each course during the Christmas party. Each speech was about 15 minutes or so he was talking about 45 to 60 minutes during the Christmas party. Same thing first day after the Christmas holiday break. I heard from other sources that he resigned not long ago because he asked the reps from the teachers' union if they had confidence in his ability as a leader. No, I don't think any of your employees have, was the answer. 2. My department manager. She was somewhat bipolar in her mood, but really didn't understand crap about my situation. Freshly educated, this is my first proper job as a teacher where I'm not thrown in as a sub, and guess what happens? First 2 weeks of the year, one of which the school is with no students, so teachers can prep and all that. We're on a strike. Being a member of the union, I'm on strike. I can't go inside the building, just outside of it. When things begin again, I have no freaking clue what I'm doing. I'm just trying as best I can. Department manager keeps going at me for not having plans when I'm running from building to building, had to buy a freaking kick bike to travel a bit faster, trying not to be later than 5 minutes to each class. Autumn break comes. I'm so exhausted, I have a seizure. No work done then either. Come back, still no plans because I had a seizure and still catching up. Have the annual worker talk thingy that we're forced to have and I finally caught up. She brings it up again that no plans. I tell her they're out now and the reason they were late was because of my seizure. Her reaction?
But that was some time ago. You're probably healthy now.
I was furious. I didn't miss one single day of work and could have given her administrative hell by going on 3 to 4 weeks of sick leave, but I didn't. But she kept bickering about those damn plans so she could cover her own butt. Felt like she'd rather run me to the ground if that meant covering herself. Story 52. My SO is a teacher. When my SO was at an in-service day with other teachers, the topic was violence in the workplace. Pretty standard, until one teacher with a broken leg came up to the front to talk and tell her story. That teacher had broken her leg earlier in the year skiing or something, but she was still wearing a brace and using crutches while teaching kindergarten. One of her 5-year-old students got angry and said he is going to jump on her leg and break it again. Seeing as it was a 5-year-old, she sent the kid to the office as a kind of timeout. Thought not much of it, just a kid, right? Well, after lunch, the teacher had her leg up on a footrest as she sat and read to the kids. This kindergarten student climbed on a nearby desk and proceeded to jump on the teacher's extended leg, breaking it again. This kid was in kindergarten. So messed up that this kid thought that this was a normal action when angry. I can't believe she's still teaching. I am genuinely afraid of that kid. Was it just like a weird lack of judgment? Or is the kid not being treated well at home? What's going on? Was the kid just born a psychopath? That is horrifying behavior. Although it is possible the kid doesn't really understand what they're doing, it just doesn't feel right still, you know? Story 53. I recently graduated and am now working as a substitute in Milwaukee. Holy hell. I truly believe that the majority of people have no clue about how bad some of these schools can be. In one of my first substitute assignments, a very disturbed child started swearing at me and threw a desk at me. The other students in class hardly fazed. For my own safety and for the safety of the rest of the students, I shouted as loud as I could, "Get out of this class now." The student left the class and I proceeded to lock the door. Said student begins slamming his fists on the glass window of the door. I immediately call the office for help, but no one answers. All of the other nearby teachers do absolutely nothing. No adults anywhere. Finally, the student leaves. No clue where he goes, and I tell another teacher my situation. Eventually, I'm told that this student is in the office. Good, right? Wrong. Within a half hour, he's sent back up to my room. Kid has some serious anger issues, and the other kids proceed to tell me their teacher doesn't make this student do work, and normally, he does whatever he wants. So while I'm trying to control the rest of the class, this student grabs one of the classroom calculators and is walking around the classroom, breaking off pieces of the calculator and throwing the pieces on the floor. I wasn't about to tell this kid to stop. In addition, all of the other students were absolutely horrible and didn't do a freaking thing. The norm for them? Absolutely awful. Never went to that school again. Luckily, still sticking with the profession. Story 54. A lot led up to this point that I won't go into. I was already planning on leaving. I'd given them at least 3 months' notice that I would be going on leave for the rest of the school year with several doctors' recommendations and whatnot to go with it. Plenty of notice. In my last week, they wouldn't let me teach my kids anymore. They pulled me into a closet turned into an office space and told me to write a lesson plans for my replacement. I wasn't allowed to say goodbye to my kids. The second to last day I was supposed to be there, my team leader walked in, sat down, and said to me,
It's a shame your students didn't learn anything this year.
I didn't look at her. I didn't respond. I actually am a bit proud of myself for that, but it's because I would have cried had I tried to speak. She then said,
Oh, nothing to say? Sad.
and left. I didn't show up for the last day. Never in my life have I ever had a self-harming thought. In that moment after she left, I thought, well, if I crash my car on the way to work tomorrow, I won't have to go. I immediately called my doctor and I worked through it all. Still looking for a different job 2 years later. My long-term disability ends this month, so I'm on a bit of a time crunch, but I got this. Why is this team leader taunting you? What's going on here? Do they hate you? What do they think you did to them? How is it that schools are such toxic places? This thread is definitely lowering my opinion of humanity overall. Story 55. I was teaching Catholic high school in an outskirt suburb of Philadelphia. My first week on the job, a student of mine was being bullied in the hallway. I got involved, brought the students into my class, and sat them down and asked them to work it out. The kid that was being bullied just sat there quiet, while the other kid just smirked at him. I repeatedly asked questions to try and figure out what was happening, but both students weren't talking. I let them go, giving the bully detention. I spoke with the kid being bullied a week later, and he finally confessed that the bully kicked him in his privates, made fun of his special needs sister, and broke his iPhone. The student supposedly had been doing this for years to this kid. I went to the principal to ask about what we could do to hold the bully accountable. There was no resolution offered at all. I reached out to the parents of the bully and insisted they pay for the broken phone and explained what a horrible child their kid is. The father just laughed at me and hung up. I tried to talk to the father once more a few weeks later at a parent-teacher conference, and the parent had the audacity to say this to me. "Leave my kid alone or I'll bully you." I told the principal, who again did nothing and offered no advice. So I quit in the middle of the semester and wrote an email to the entire school about the bully and his crappy parents. No one seemed to care. I'm bartending and waiting tables now. Story 56. I had a teacher in middle school named Mr. Crow. He was a science teacher. He looked a bit creepy, kinda Steve Buscemi-ish, if Steve Buscemi was a bit older and had a goatee. Real lanky guy, but you could tell he just loved science. He loved everything to do with it, and I always looked forward to his class. But kids are absolute jerks. Every single day someone would pass by his door and yell out "caw-caw" like a crow or something, or sometimes the bold jerk would even do it in his class. One day, Mr. Crow just snapped. He stood up on his desk, started flapping his arms up and down and going, "Caw, you think this is freaking funny? Caw, 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 caw!" And about half the room bursted into laughter. The other half was scared crapless. I was just kinda dumbfounded. After that, Mr. Crow never seemed to be quite the same. Like his joy of science was finally overshadowed by his hatred of jerk kids. We had fewer and fewer hands-on experiments, and more, watch this VHS tape about science or whatever for the rest of class. Kinda sad. Hope he's doing alright. I haven't seen him in years. See, this is one of those things that on the surface seems like whatever. It's not an attack on his character or anything, it's just word association, haha, funny, caw-caw like a crow. But I can absolutely understand why after, I don't know, the 5 millionth time, it would get a bit annoying. It sucks to hear a story about a teacher who loved what they do get sort of snuffed out by this. Story 57. College. The promised full-time position never came. Then one semester I went unpaid for the spring semester until April, and that only happened because I demanded they wire funds to my bank, and I had to beg to use our students' food pantry because my husband was on disability. In the academic system, demanding you get paid is known as being a troublemaker. K-12. My district pays $10 an hour for a consultant educator with an advanced degree. Benefits would erase the check, so I was lucky to opt out. I was told to submit lesson plans and equipment lists because we were not to spend our money on the students. Standard, right? I never got a single thing on my supplies list and had to buy everything myself because I had a lesson plan. I netted negative $200 for the semester. Even then, it was worth it to give back to the community. And then the county closed the school and broke up the community among several different area schools. The school was the center of the community, and poverty levels of our students, who tend to have unstable home lives, was used as a reason for closing the school. A lot of our kids had parents in the neighborhood military base or the neighborhood prisons. Having a school they could walk to with an organic garden the kids maintained and used to supplement the diet, passing parks on the way where we took field trips because we weren't allowed field trip busing, and learned about local plants and wildlife. Among the schools on the chopping block, we were outperforming academically because we had neighborhood science clubs and scouting and soccer, community integrated because we couldn't get funding, a full music program too. Everyone went to the same junior high and high school, so we had programs to get kids excited and prepared for the next phase of their education. In our demographics, our children tended to have problems with long-term visualization. The school had done so much to implant itself in the community out of a lack of budget and survived like the tough weeds we are. I grew up there, though I went to the magnet school for weirdos. The district just took the school away. They took away the kids' garden, and the little light prisms they hung in the trees, and the sandbox where we simulated a paleontological dig. We were punished for being poor. We have no common community facilities left. The school was where we did everything. They finally got rid of that weed. I couldn't stand it anymore. Our county school board is so politicized and dysfunctional because it's a focus of a lot of outside federal money and detention. You know who's replacing the public schools here and getting money to do it? Walmart. They're called Great Works Charter Schools. They tried to cover up the Walmart connection via a couple shells but got found out. And they are the most shady things I've ever heard of. This is bad. It's like my state is rejecting education like a donor heart. I'm starting a historian in residence program in a rural area in about a month. Nobody's paying me. I'm paying to rent out the ghost town, and I will be conducting original historical research in the area. I have to try something. Maybe nobody will care or stop by, or maybe they will. Either way, I'm moving forward. It's just not in a traditional classroom. Story 58. I got thrown in to teach a class I had never taught before, last minute, with no curriculum or support. I tried my best. I had a kid in that class who threatened me multiple times with physical violence. I brought my concerns to administration and asked for help several times, and I received literally no response. Not even an acknowledgement of the email I sent. Then they stuck another girl in the class midway through the term. She was half black, important info. She was also a bit of a handful. I learned the next day that she wasn't supposed to be in any classes with a certain kid who was in my class. The reason was because he had already been in substantial trouble for calling this girl racist nicknames using the N-word, and rallying a group of other kids to do the same. I brought this up to guidance and administration, and they refused to do anything. I had another kid who refused to do any of my assignments. Like literally, I won't do this. His parent blamed me, and said he was obviously provoked by me, and I needed to provide him alternative assignments, when I was asking for only 3 written sentences with a clear prompt. Administration gave me literally zero support. I hate some of those kids. I've never said that about any other kids in any other class I've ever taught. Any other kids in any other schools, even kids who are a thorn in my side for far longer. I know it's terrible, but I can't help kids who only have the goal of collecting government checks like Daddy does to feed his Keystone and Marlboro habit. Those kids should be left behind. Screw the stupid, backward, redneck, racist, bigoted, podunk piece of utter crap town. I have a feeling OP was wanting to get this off their chest for a while. I understand that rage building up, but wow, they really went for it with that last sentence, huh? Story 59. Not a teacher, student here. My screw this moment destroyed public school for me. I don't even want to go to college. I had an altercation with a kid. He was bullying a kid with Asperger's. I honestly kindly told him it wasn't worth it. No attitude, no meanness. And he tells me he's going to break my glasses. He walks up to me, insists he's going to hit me, and then shoves me. I elbow him in the face to protect myself, and then he begs for me to fight him as I tell him I have no desire to. Eventually, I calm him down, we drop it, and continue as usual. Long story short, a few days later, right outside school, he passes by in a car with 4 friends, jumps out, and sucker punches me in the nose. I do my best, but he hit first and hit hard. As soon as I'm on the ground, he hits me 15 or so more times, breaks my nose, and gives me a pretty bad concussion. You'd imagine the school would suspend him. They didn't. I actually had a few classes with him. Instead of changing the bully's classes, he had connections in the administrative office, so they changed mine. He gets suspended 4 months after because we finally threatened to go to the news, all while his friends were mocking me and posting photos of my bloody face on social media. Dude single-handedly screwed up my school year. I had great classes before, then got switched to crappier classes all across the board. School taught me cliquish favoritism matters more than anything else. Certain people can do certain things, and nothing will happen. That's just how it is. Story 60. Still a teacher, but at a different district now. Elementary. Student brought a gun to school. I happened to see it peeping out of his backpack as he was putting his homework in his bag. I quietly told him to leave his bag on my desk. Tried calling every office number and no one picks up. Called my classroom neighbor to do me a huge favor and take the rest of the class out for bonus recess, and that it was urgent that she do this. She hesitantly agreed. Students left and I asked the kid to stay inside and in his seat with his hand on the desk at all times. Finally got a hold of the secretary and explained the situation. She said that the principal decided to go home early before lunch, and the assistant principal was not in her office, and that I should just hold on to the gun until the principal decided to come back, if she decided to come back. I said, forget it, I'm calling the police, and hung up. I went ahead and asked the student if I knew why I held them in. He replied, yes. I questioned him that if I were to ask him to put what was in the bag on my desk and step away, would he do it? He replied he would. I asked him if he would do anything irrational or reckless to me, and he replied, no, I like you. I was standing right behind him as he took the gun out, and I instructed him to point it away from us and slowly leave it on my desk, and then step back towards me. I told him to go sit on the other side of the room. I checked the handgun to make sure the safety was on, and verified it was unloaded and nothing was in the chamber. There was one. I asked the student if there was any ammunition in his bag, and he said no. Cops came, took my statement, asked where the administration was, I just shrugged, and departed with the student and the gun. Kid said he felt powerful having it, and that he only wanted to pretend shoot at some kids at school. I sent a letter home explaining an incident happened and that their kids were safe, but there would be a follow-up letter from the school. Parents of the kid do not answer my phone call. Left a voicemail. Kid gets released to his parents and apparently brags about bringing the gun, the cops, and how he was a criminal to his friends. Rumors start spreading. Next day at school, admin doesn't talk to me. I asked both of them if they were going to write the letter, and they said it didn't need to be done, and I failed to contact them first. I left the office after I tried explaining no one ever picks up the phone here, and the assistant principal was AWOL. Kid arrives at school 2 hours later, and principal escorts him to my room and tells him to sit. I said, no, he shouldn't be here. Principal essentially said too bad and left. I sent the kid to the office immediately and told them to do their job and discipline the kid. Office tells me that the principal has left for the day. Told the secretary, that's not my problem. Get a call from the district for a meeting because I was refusing to teach the student and that I must be doing it because I was racist. In addition, I was very hostile to the secretary who happens to be a distant aunt of the kid. The hell? I asked my union rep to be there and they eventually wrote me up. I included the police report to verify their claims as false. End of the year, I said, screw this school and this district and left. Story 61. I had a teacher in my school who was literally the coolest teacher. He was a favorite of all the students and just a really cool guy. We were in drama class working on running some lines for the upcoming spring musical. Two of the students would not shut up. He kept asking them to be quiet and to focus. Well, after he'd already given them detention because they wouldn't stop their yammering, and they still didn't shut up, he slammed his script onto the chairs behind him, and the booklet broke, and papers went everywhere. He picked up the music stand, those cheapo lightweight black ones, and threw it in the direction, not directly at the annoying kids, on the stage. It landed, bounced back a few feet, and then it was dead silent. No one dared to move or breathe, and the two kids just stared in total disbelief. These were two junior guys, so like 17 years old, not tiny kids, and then they turned pale. Our teacher then said, "Now then, I need you to be quiet and shut your mouths, now." And they did. And before you know it, he was back to being Mr. Cool Teacher again. This teacher never lost his temper, and if he did, it was because of some yahoos who deserved it. But we all applauded after it happened because those two jerks deserved it. They were annoying as all get out. Story 62. One day while I was subbing at one of the tougher schools in the area, I got through most of the day and was pleasantly surprised. I was even questioning the school's poor reputation, until the moment I knew exactly why. It was the last 2 minutes of the day, 8th period, and I just started to gather my stuff together. I turned my back to grab my jacket and pack my bag. Suddenly, I heard a crazy loud boom. I even for a split second thought it could have been a gunshot, but luckily it wasn't. What it was some type of firework. I looked up to see a group of kids were sprinting out of the room. Many of the kids were scared and all of our ears were ringing. I knew I obviously had to do something about it, but as a sub on his first day there, I didn't know the kids well. So after a few seconds, I ran out of the room after realizing everyone was all right. I grabbed the closest person in a suit near me, later learned he was an assistant principal, and frantically explained what just happened, expecting him to be as mad and shocked as I was. But in the most screw that way possible, this guy looked at me, looked at his watch, looked back at me and said, "Would you look at the time?" Put his head back down, and waltzed down the hallway as if nothing happened. Safe to say, I never stepped foot back in that building. Story 63. I'm not a teacher, but my best friend is. She's fed up with the no zero policy her school has adopted. The policy and the theory behind it are bad enough, but the superintendent very obviously instated it because his son was close to being kicked off the basketball team due to bad grades. This kid had not turned in 3 very crucial assignments, and because she really wanted to be sure the kid had a chance to learn this stuff, she gave him an extra week to do the assignments for something like 75% credit. That's a sick deal, especially when the zeros mean getting kicked off the only thing you really seem to enjoy doing. But in spite of it all, the kid never did those assignments. It was at this point the superintendent came to discipline my friend, the teacher, and almost immediately instated a policy that required all teachers to give 50% credit no matter what, even if no effort was put forth. An even worse version of an already bad no zeros policy being adopted by some schools in the US. I never understood the idea behind these policies, other than, I don't want to hurt the kids' feelings. I don't get it, man. What a terrible way to teach kids. All you are teaching them is they can do no work and they will still be fine, which simply isn't true in the world. Well, depends on your situation in life, but for the most part is not true. Story 64. I taught people how to be electricians at a further education college. My boss was cooking the stats to make himself look good. Students were being allowed to pass practical exams despite being blatantly and woefully incompetent, as in the majority of their cables would not stay in because they hadn't been terminated correctly, which is the kind of thing that can easily lead to house fires. Students were also being given the official answers from the password-protected document. He was printing it out and giving it to them to slip inside their books in exams. He was also invigilating his own exams for students that he had taught, a massive violation of the rules, and allowing them to sit the exam with their notes in front of them. I documented this for months, including several pieces of photographic evidence, and passed it all on to the quality team, whose job it was to ensure that this sort of thing didn't happen. They investigated and concluded there were no deliberate attempts to cheat, so they'd rather put people's lives at risk than miss out on a bit of funding. Story 65. When I lost a job promised to me by someone in the school district's freshly graduated daughter with the same credentials as me, minus experience. Nepotism runs rampant in education, in Canada at least. I was disappointed, but it was a blessing in disguise because I hated teaching kids. Always had to be the big bad jerk pushing idiotic curriculum that was either dated or put together by out-of-touch, quote, experts. You are no longer free to teach your way, and the job has become 50% paper pushing, 25% behavior wrangling, and 25% teaching, not to mention the extra time spent working to compensate for veteran, tenured teachers coasting until retirement, sometimes well beyond their expiry date. And they're not helping your school or department in any way, shape, or form. My first year teaching, I was supposed to have a mentor in this one teacher who was literally assigned to support a first year teacher since he did nothing else, and I asked for some help with some issue I was having, and he had a ton of experience with it. He responded, "Sorry, I have an appointment right after school," then mimed a golf swing. Anyway, after I lost my next potential contract, I went into the nonprofit sector teaching adults work skills, academic upgrading, and it paid off my student loans and I'm debt-free now. Teaching adults is even more mind-numbing since they should know better, and it's way harder for them to retain knowledge. I really missed working with school-aged kids. They were amazing, even the bad ones. So much energy and enthusiasm, but the system is too broken to ever want to go back. I'm transitioning out of teaching altogether this year. Contract ends at the end of May, and I begin working full-time at an independent distillery/brewery. I worked there in my summers off, and this week, March break, and I love it. Good, honest, blue-collar work that isn't thankless since it's with a family-owned company who are very respectful to their workers and their product. It's a complete 180-degree turn in terms of career paths, and I get paid a lot less, like way less. But let me summarize it for you. Teaching freaking sucks. Story 66. Obligatory, not a teacher, but I worked as a program assistant for a teacher of mine while I was in high school. In the 2 years that I worked this job, I learned that if I loved teaching, which I do, I should never step foot in a public school as a teacher. Aside from the typical structural complaints with education, funding, admin, etc., I was very disappointed with the disproportionate effort put in by students relative to that put in by teachers. The straw that broke the camel's back was probably 1 week that my teacher was absent for a conference. We hired a substitute. I was still in high school and wasn't eligible to run the classroom for liability reasons, but I was instructed to run some exercises for the business management class because I had more background in the subject/course than the sub. I spent probably 4 to 5 hours a night putting things together to maximize learning, but the students really weren't showing much effort in return. They'd text, ignore me, not do any of the readings the night before like I'd asked. You know, typical high school student stuff. At that point, I knew if I wanted to become a teacher, I'd have to become a professor, teach at a private school, or be a private tutor. I feel bad for being annoyed with lazy teachers in retrospect because, quite honestly, they probably had years of bad students before giving up on being a great teacher, and it only took me a week. When there's no incentive to be a good teacher, it's hard to be too upset with people when they aren't. That isn't to blame the students either. The incentive to teach well probably shouldn't come from people who are only there because attendance is compulsory. Story 67. Had a class who, with multiple reminders, I told to put their Chromebooks away before they left class. Maybe 5 did before the bell rang. I stood in front of the door and told them they couldn't leave until all of them were put away. One kid walked up to me, got in my face, tried to threaten me, and told me, "You're not gonna stop me from walking out the door." This is after multiple issues with the same kid. I stood my ground and told him to go back to his seat. After his 5th referral from me, he was back in my class the next day. Discipline never did anything with any of my students that had major behavioral problems, and I was approached by 2 of the discipline guys that I shouldn't have kept them until my instructions were followed. Screw them and that job. Story 68. Not an ex-teacher. Actually in my first year currently. As with any first-year professional in any field, there are more times than not where I think, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. In my school, I work as part of a team teaching in my subject in close vicinity with other teachers. For extra context, I teach an elective course. I've been asking my senior teacher for help all year, and he basically brushes me off constantly. Every few months, he'll find something I'm doing wrong to lecture me about how it's unacceptable work. Usually something I've asked for help on, like how to pace my class appropriately, or how to teach a certain concept more effectively. The latest occurrence? I had one of my classes taken away from my responsibility because I'm, quote, not capable of teaching them at the level they should be. My senior teacher does not have a class at the same time as the previously mentioned class that is now under his instruction, and has been observing me silently all year. Instead of, helping me, like I asked, he's been silently watching me fail. Once he took over, it was an entirely different routine, teaching strategy, and curriculum. I've asked dozens of times if there was anything I should change, and the most I ever got were simple suggestions. Talk less, or you talk too fast. Not to mention that every other day this week, I've been babysitting the students that are failing other classes to help them pass and rejoin the class. Today, my senior teacher decided they won't be rejoining, and instead will be a separate class. The worst behaving and most behind kids are now my class, while he retains instruction responsibilities over my best ones. This goes completely against my teaching philosophy, and I haven't been included in any decision-making regarding this class. Keep in mind, this is only the most recent issue I've had with my coworker/supervisor, so yeah, screw this. Story 69. I'm not a teacher, but I was in class when a professor walked out on us. We were going to go over that week's chapter, and she started the lecture with what should have been an easy question to ask. Nobody spoke. She then asked if anyone had actually read the chapter. Again, nobody says a word. There were over 100 people in that class, and nobody had taken the time to read the chapter that week. She threw up her arms and casually said, "I'm done," and just left. It felt like the college professor equivalent of saying, "I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed." Story 70. Ex-teacher here. I'm a man and I taught freshmen and seniors at the age of about 22 to 23. There were a whole lot of little things leading up to my screw this moment. Mostly it was frustration with the actual job. Not being able to actually teach the kids who wanted to learn because the job is really babysitting and trying to find creative ways to trick them into absorbing important information while fighting a system that only cares about tests, and struggling with kids who hate you and hate being there. I had to break up fights without inciting lawsuits. Being not far from their age, it provided the additional benefit of knowing their vernacular and the apps that they were using, as well as what they were using them for. This was also a bit of a burden because you can't feign ignorance when you hear them talking about what they were DM'd during class, or what illicit substances the Venmo was for. The screw this moment, though, winding up at a bar after term ended where one of my students was drinking underage at. She got up real close and said, "I'm 18 now." I politely told her to go home, as minors weren't allowed there, and peaced the hell out. Did not go back to teach the next year. There were plenty of inappropriate comments made in class that I could either ignore or squash down, depending on severity and context, but the risk of being a male teacher in this day and age of knee-jerk reactions and situations taken out of context meant that even if I took the appropriate course of action, if it involved unsolicited comments or approaches, I could still have problems. Story 71. After requesting to assist with coaching football, I was told the day before the school year started at the new school that I would be the head football coach and athletic director. After working my butt off to get everything organized and presentable on and off the field, I constantly begged and asked teachers to help with simple duties like taking money at the gate. Things went fine until the last home game, homecoming. Since we were expecting unusually large crowds for this, everyone who did anything was involved, and even though there was a snafu with seating a week prior and some of the paperwork that was turned in the week before, I was told it was all taken care of and it would be fine. I've coached and taught for 15 years, so I was pretty obsessive about how things got done. The game went great, had hundreds of people in attendance, and we got everyone out without incident. I had noticed a few things in the weeks prior that gave me some suspicion that something wonky had been happening. Well, one of the people, an administrator involved in the wonky behavior, was responsible for the gate. No money was taken up. They had been off with another administrator having inappropriate relations, both married to others, when they were supposed to be collecting gate money, which would have covered my entire season's budget. 2 days later, I said, screw this. I'm now a claims adjuster and immediately bumped my salary, desire to go to work every day, and sanity. Come on, man, that's like an important job. Not only did you just blow it off, but you, blew it off. In other words, you cheated on your spouse and ruined this whole program's budget. Incredible, great work. Story 72. After more than 10 years of teaching part-time, applying for every job in my field in my area, and having 2 kids during all this, my employer cut one of my classes 6 weeks before the start of the term. They cited low enrollment, but the summer term wasn't over yet, and likely the enrollment would have gone up had they left my section in place. When I asked for another class to make up the difference, citing my need to pay my youngest's preschool tuition, they told me they didn't have any other classes for me. This is after I committed to a longer day for my youngest, thus the need for more money to cover tuition so I could teach the damn classes in the first place. They needed me enough to keep asking me to teach, but wouldn't or couldn't make me permanent. I quit for good the following year. My first book will be out next year, and I am so glad I quit teaching. Edit. Initially, I answered on my phone, which made it impossible to give a full reply. Here is some context for the story. First, I knew I wanted to teach college when I was in my sophomore year of university. I got a BA in English and an MA in English with a graduate certificate in technical communication. I never intended to teach anything other than college. I wasn't interested in teaching high school at all. Then I got married. Rather than spend 3 or so years away from my husband so I could work on my PhD, I saw the writing on the wall. His job was too good for us to leave, so I could find a tenure track teaching position elsewhere. So no PhD for me, and the department I taught in had a number of non-tenure track positions that didn't require a PhD. I figured my teaching experience would help me find one of those jobs after I taught as an adjunct for several years. Fast forward to one of my colleagues leaving for a tenure track job. She had occupied a non-tenure position in my area, business and technical writing, and I figured they would hire another lecturer, non-tenure, to replace her. I thought I stood a decent shot, as 1, I'd been with the department for the better part of a decade, and 2, I had taught those classes for a significant chunk of that time. Not to mention I had done everything I could as a part-timer, limited by my station to few opportunities, mind you, to make myself indispensable to my superiors. And then, instead of hiring another lecturer, they made the vacant position a tenure track position that required a PhD, that I didn't have and had not pursued because, as I'd seen happen over and over, they hired lecturers within my WE department with just MAs. I was furious. Worse than that, I'd felt stupid for naively believing it would all work out. I live in a red state and I have a special needs child. I face an uphill battle half the time trying to get him educated. Losing out on that job because they changed the classification, and losing the class 6 weeks before the semester even started, well, it took every ounce of maturity I had not to go marching into the university with middle fingers and F-bombs. I knew I didn't want to burn bridges, even though I felt like screaming that day. It's taken years not to feel like a failure at the career I chose at 19. One of my former coworkers, who was also a friend, left for similar reasons about a year after I did. She said that we didn't fail, the system failed us. If that's the case, it's failing the thousands of students in our university system as well. I cannot stress enough how universities are now being run like a business rather than an institution of learning, and how those attitudes are gutting the talent pool that once would have spent years in education and now have scattered elsewhere. Alright, now I return to reminding myself that I'm not a failure. Story 73. Students drove my pickup and I thought they died in a fiery inferno. So keep in mind I work in a very small school 30 miles from town in rural Montana. It's at a Hutterite colony, communal living similar to Amish, but they can use most modern technology. It's basically a giant farm with about 80 people living there. This particular incident happened on the last day of school. One of the perks of the job is that on Fridays, the colony fills my pickup with gas. The oldest boys get to drive the pickup to the pump and fill it up. The last day of school is like changing of the guards for gas filling. The 8th graders graduate, they only go to school until 8th grade, and the next oldest boy gets to fill my pickup with gas. So I give said boy, Mark, my driving instructions. Don't go over 10 miles per hour, drive carefully, radio stays at a reasonable level, don't mess with the radio while driving, go right down and come back. This particular year I have 3 male students, and Mark asks if the 2 younger boys can go with him. I reluctantly agree, reminding him of how important it is to drive responsibly. So they all head out the door and get into my pickup and take off. Approximately 10 seconds after they get into my pickup, I hear this god-awful screeching metal on metal collision. I think to myself, what the hell was that? I head out the back door and I see my pickup high-centered on top of a large metal barrel, and there was smoke pouring out from under the thing. I went into full panic mode running to the pickup, throwing the door open and see 3 wide-eyed boys. The music was so loud I couldn't hear a word they said, but they all bailed out of the passenger door and ran for the school. I jumped into the pickup and pulled it off the barrel thinking it was still on fire. Turns out the barrel wasn't actually lit at the time. The smoke was just ash that was pluming out from the kids hitting it. The kid driving was messing with the radio, not paying attention, and had driven into the barrel. He then proceeded to panic, hit the gas, and drive the pickup onto the barrel, making it look like the thing was going up in flames. I have never been so scared and then upset in my life. I checked for damages on the truck and then headed into the school. Everyone was sitting quietly at their desks. I proceeded to cuss the boys out and then walked out the door and went home. I look back and it's pretty funny now, but god damn was I terrified when that happened. Story 74. Mine is much less climactic. I'm choosing to share to offer a positive teaching experience. My district was great. I loved my coworkers, I loved my job. I was good at my job and I still miss it. I was in a great district that paid well for our area and valued their teachers compared to many districts around us. But the light bulb moment for me came when we had a child. I had fully intended on placing him in childcare and continuing my career. However, when we looked at the costs of childcare compared to what I was making, we realized I would be bringing home $300 a month after childcare costs. I also realized that I was busy raising other children while leaving my own for someone else to care for. I was working 10 to 12-hour days, and our child would have to be in childcare for those hours. The choice was simple. I chose to quit to raise my family. When my kiddos are ready for school, I'll be extremely lucky to get into a district similar to my last one. Story 75. Obligatory, not a teacher, but I do have a screw this crap moment from a teacher. So, it's 6th grade. This year we're moved out to the portables because our school is full, and while they do this, they decide to mix the classes around, so enter Brandon, the ultimate 6th grade craphead. This kid just doesn't listen and doesn't give a crap, which angered the hell out of my 6th grade teacher, Mr. McDonald. On the first occasion, Brandon just isn't listening, talking really loud, etc. And after Mr. McDonald asks him like 8 times to be quiet, he yells at the top of his lungs for Brandon to shut up and whips a huge Webster dictionary at his head and storms out. The next week enter a similar situation with Brandon being a little crap and him just not listening to Mr. McDonald. This time, the dude picks up a desk and chucks it across the classroom and nearly misses Brandon, breaks a computer and window, and we never saw Mr. McDonald again. Story 76. So not me, but my girlfriend. And it may not be a screw this moment because she still teaches, but it's certainly the toughest and most draining situation I've seen her in. That year, she was teaching 3rd grade in a rural area. Not the we're a bunch of farming family type of area, but rather the we can't afford to live in the city, so we live in a tiny village an hour away from a small city kind of rural area. Not the roughest of places, but it's certainly not easy either. So the year starts. She comes into class, starts taking attendance, and having the kids present themselves. One kid isn't on her list of students. We'll call him Tim. Turns out Tim's mother and her boyfriend, not the kid's actual dad, important for later, had recently moved and didn't think to inform the school or anything. Just decided to drop Tim and his brother on the first day of school and let the school sort things out. When asking the previous school for Tim's file, she learned that he had only been at his previous school 1 year. Seemed like the family moved around a lot. Tim wasn't the brightest kid. Far from it. He had to retake his 3rd grade and was still struggling considerably. He once told my girlfriend that he doesn't understand why he struggles so much as he was one of the brightest kids in his previous school. Right. You have to retake your 3rd grade because you were the brightest kid in class. He also had several mental issues. He was especially notorious for stealing. He would steal other kids' pencils, toys, etc. He would have it in his hands and would still deny having stolen it. Within a month of having moved into this small town, he had already been caught trying to steal from the general store. At some point, my girlfriend used fake money, like really obvious fakes, to teach kids how currency works. Tim stole some of it and tried to buy candy from that same general store he was caught stealing at weeks prior. As I said, Tim's mother wasn't with Tim's father anymore. It's unclear if this is the reason why they broke it off, but for a while, Tim's father wasn't allowed to have custody of the kids due to being violent with them and the mother. At some point, the brother of the boyfriend of Tim's mother came in to live with them. He drove a white van. Soon, several robberies were reported in homes in the village. Though it never officially got linked to them, the white van was often seen where the robberies took place. I don't know why they never got arrested for it, or if they were even considered by the police, but soon the mother broke up with the boyfriend and both the boyfriend and his brother moved away. It's not too surprising then that Tim had this kind of behavior. My girlfriend tried very hard to work with the kid and she was starting to form a bond with him. He started behaving better, but he still struggled quite a lot and his behavior wasn't always great. She started working on a plan with the principal and with the mother. However, with each meeting, the mother grew more and more distressed. Clearly, she was in over her head. She likely had drug issues and didn't really know how to handle a problem child. Still, my girlfriend was excited. The plan was coming together. It was solid. Tim was getting a bit better. His behavior was improving. His grades were slightly better. She was exhausted but optimistic. Then one day Tim's behavior goes back to being horrible. Not in quite the same way, though. More in a depressed way. "What's happening?" my girlfriend asked Tim. "My mom is sending me to my dad's next week." "For how long?" "I'm going to live with him from now on." Turns out that previously, whenever the school started to take action on Tim's behavior, the mother moved him to a different school instead of having to take responsibility. This time, though, the mother gave up completely on Tim and decided to send him to live with his abusive father. Tim was clearly distressed for that whole week. He even showed my girlfriend he had stabbed a pencil several times into his feet and said, "I wish I didn't exist." Then Tim was gone, and there was nothing my girlfriend could do about it. I had never seen her so depressed. I knew Tim was draining on my girlfriend, and I was hoping that he'd be moved to a different class, but not like this. I tried my hardest to be supportive, but I admit I expected her to go on a burnout. She didn't. She recovered. She's incredibly strong, but damn. Every time I think of Tim, I feel horrible, so I can't imagine how she feels. Some kids just fall through the cracks, and it really sucks. Story 77. My mom is a high school physics/chem teacher, and they oftentimes use Bunsen burners and chemicals for labs. She, of course, must teach the students lab safety. One of her students refused to wear the appropriate wardrobe, hair up, goggles, lab coat, etc. My mother wouldn't let her do the labs, and she started to fail the class. The girl's mom complained and complained.
Why can't my daughter do the lab wearing what she wants?
She even complained to the principal. They ended up having a parent-student-principal meeting in which the principal laid out why as well. The parent then screamed at my mom about how ridiculous it was and helped her daughter ditch my mom's class period every time she had class. They'd go to the mall or out to eat. She got an F. I wish I could see inside of her mind and figure out why the idea of safety was so offensive to her. Like, these rules are so your daughter is not in danger. Isn't that something you want? I don't get it. Story 78. I haven't quit yet, but when I do, it'll be because of the many instances of dealing with violent or psychopathic students and not having a damn thing get done about it. I literally had a 14-year-old student who told me on a daily basis he fantasized about hurting people in our class, and once threw a textbook at me because I wrote him up for calling a student a slur. I could hear him screaming, "Idiot female dog mother effer" down the hallways as he punched the lockers. I had to call the office to report a kid on the loose. He literally left a trail of his own blood down the hall. So what happens? He gets 2 weeks of suspension, comes back to class, and has another meltdown. I have nightmares about that kid coming to school with a gun. I honestly want to get out of teaching, because I think if I don't, it might end me one day. Story 79. At the beginning of every school year, new admins will usually champion a few behavioral/discipline issues and really harp on them. My last year teaching, we got a new principal, and the big one she was going to be a stickler about was students in the halls during class. We had a big issue with kids just kind of wandering the halls, and it was a legit thing that needed to be solved. However, the solution was don't let kids out of the classroom. No passes, no bathroom breaks, nothing short of medical emergencies, basically. They'd added like a minute between classes to, quote, make sure students had adequate time to go to the restroom. Obviously, huge problems with this. But hey, it's what the admins wanted, and all the non-admin faculty knew that they would chill out on it within a few weeks, as happened every year. We were assured if there was external complaint, they'd handle it. It was pretty much boilerplate at this point. So first week of school, everyone is getting this no passes thing drilled into their heads. It's in the back-to-school packets everyone got. It's on the website. It's got a whole section in the first day thing. Whole big thing. First couple of days of school go fine. No real issues. The schedule is all chaos anyway. A couple teachers let kids out for various reasons, and get blasted on an all-faculty nastygram about it. After 2 or 3 of those, we get the picture. This principal is serious. Whatever. It's dumb, but what can I do? Finally, second week of school. I get this kid that needs to use the restroom about 20 minutes into class. I say, sorry, can't, and move on. He keeps asking over and over again. Again, I'm not about to be the newest sacrificial lamb over email, so I stick to it. No, you can't go, I can't let you. We've been through this like a dozen times. I'm sorry, but it's just not something you or I have control over. He survives, runs to the restroom between classes, life continues. Next morning, principal calls me to the office during planning period.
So-and-so's mother called me yesterday afternoon. She said you told her son to hold it all class and wouldn't let him go to the bathroom.
Yeah. The policy is no hall passes.
Well, next time, I expect a little more flexibility with him. I won't be having this conversation again.
And goes back to doing crap on her computer. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And when I knew I would no longer be teaching, I let my lead know that I wouldn't be coming back the following year. So if she needed help finding a replacement in the meantime, I was happy to. There were many reasons to quit, but that was the final one where I just lost all ability to care about that career path. Note, Kevin did not ever contribute to my desire to quit. Kevin was a 14-year-old kid. I expected 14-year-olds to be nasty, rude, immature, and unprofessional. I don't expect to get thrown under the bus by a professional administrator that says she has my back, but doesn't. Story 80. Relatively speaking, it had nothing to do with the kids. I just had a year from hell that can be simplified to 3 causes. 1. The director from hell. I worked for an after-school program as I was finishing college. Our director was horrible. She hated to be one-upped, had an inferiority complex, and was emotionally unstable. This meant that if you did your job really well, she was worried that they would replace her with you and chew you up for the most minor items to make it seem like you were doing horribly. Then if you didn't perform well, you were trying to sabotage her and make her look bad to her supervisors. It was a chore to work for her. Keep all this in mind as issues 2 and 3 are magnified by her shenanigans. 2. A former student Murdered a lifelong friend of mine as part of a gang initiation. I worked this job for 6 years before I quit. Year 1, I had this kid. We'll call him John. John didn't want to be there. He was a troublemaker and I didn't have the skills to work with him. Fast forward and John and a buddy have to steal a truck as part of a gang initiation. They end up trying to steal a pickup from a bunch of guys playing poker. They get the keys and everything, but John decides to shoot at the guys anyway while taking off in the truck. My friend blocked the other guys and took most of the fire and died. This by itself was hard to deal with. I blamed myself for a while. What if I worked harder on John? Could I have prevented this? Then I started being wary of problem students. I went back and forth between those two mindsets for the remainder of my time with the program. Meanwhile, my supervisor gave me no time to process what happened. I was in a classroom the day my friend died, and the next day when I found out the police arrested John for the murder. By myself. No one to help or make sure I was okay. I got through, but I just couldn't process it. 3. The straw that broke this camel's back. I was on my way to work after picking up some parts from Radio Shack for my sound system for a school dance. My little 97 Ford Ranger gets T-boned by a Suburban that just missed the driver's side door. Truck was totaled. I lost consciousness and didn't come to until the paramedics were loading me into the ambulance. To this day, I don't even remember getting hit, just leaving Radio Shack and then being loaded into an ambulance. Once I get a hold of my dad to let him know what happened, he calls the office and tells them. The secretary's response was,
Well, if he could call you, why couldn't he call us?
Doc gives me 2 weeks off to recover. My parents take the note, and the supervisor, who used to be a nurse, says there's no reason I should be off that long for a fender bender. When I finally come back to work, I ask about getting a new work crap, since the ER docs cut the stuff I was wearing off to put me in a gown, and they were worried about a neck injury. I'd seen the supervisor give shirts to other staff when they were ruined, so they would at least have 2. They only ever charged if you wanted more than 2. She said I could have another one, but I would have to pay for it. Screw that crap. 2 weeks later, I got whatever job I could just so I could quit that damn place. Story 81. I tutored for 2 years in high school and 2 years in college. I was in my college's teaching program and wanted to be a high school English teacher and also coach sports. Tutoring in high school was great. Tutoring in college was miserable. What did it for me was I was assigned a middle school and a high school that I would split my tutoring hours up at. The high school students really didn't care about their grades, and the majority of students I had were required to get tutoring from my school because they were failing and on the verge of dropping out. In orientation, we were given walkie-talkies and told if there was ever an incident or altercation to not get involved. Walkie-talkie the principal and school officer directly. Sure enough, there was a fight in the classroom I was tutoring in, and desk chairs being thrown within my first month. What did it for me was, 1, the school didn't care if the students did well or not. They just wanted them to pass standardized tests to keep budget money and funding coming in, and wanted the students to pass their grades so they would graduate and get out of the school and off their hands. 2, the students themselves didn't care to learn or to be tutored, and treated a lot of the people trying to help them with disrespect. 3, the actual fight in my classroom was the big last straw. Not about to get into a career that doesn't pay well, where the employees aren't treated well or respected by the school board or students, and there isn't great room for growth unless you go to grad school at night while teaching. Got into consulting instead and make way more money than I ever would have if I stuck with the plan, and I'm much happier. Story 82. Former middle school English teacher here. Taught 5 years in 3 inner-city charter schools. It was 2 months into my first year teaching. I realized none of my students could read or write on grade level, and that teaching was actually going to mean dumbing everything down while scrambling to assess and fill in the massive holes in everyone's learning. It would also mean being a surrogate parent and counselor, since most of them had unstable home lives. I thought it was just my attitude and being new to the profession, so I stuck it out for 3 years, then left to get a master's in library science. After that, I tried a new school, then tried another new school, and a new role, school librarian. The burden of the students' needs, the lack of resources, the expectations of administration and financial stakeholders, and not being able to teach anything except how to be a person and not wreak havoc on others nearly broke me. I cried every day in my car before summoning the courage to start another day of teaching. I briefly considered trying to teach in a suburban district where the crushing weight of the students' needs wouldn't weigh so much, but I knew I wouldn't escape the dumbing down of learning and the politics of education. So I joined the statistic of teachers who leave the profession after 5 years, and I never looked back. Now I work at a public library, and there's not a week that goes by where I don't thank the living Lord that I got out of teaching. Story 83. Got licensed to teach and worked 2 years at a high-need urban high school. Most colleagues in the district are doing AmeriCorps or TFA and are not licensed. These teachers are mostly garbage. as they have zero training and are getting ripped apart by city teenagers. However, they get free printing, their own laptops and tablets, and are generally favored by administration. I get 100 copies a month and nothing else. No smartboard and no supplies. I also got observed formally and randomly 2 times a month for 90 minutes at a time. This determined whether I could stay at my position. If I was seen as struggling in one area, say class management, for an observation, and did not fix it by the next random observation, I was gone at the end of the year. TFA and AmeriCorps were observed formally 2 times all year, and it had no bearing on their status at the school. 2 years guaranteed. One TFA teacher randomly disappeared for 2 months, returned for the final week, and got to keep his job. My principal once chastised and threatened my job for taking 2 sick days with the flu before Thanksgiving break. A useless 2 school days, by the way. Said principal also generally pushed me out of the door when I said I wasn't happy with my current position. Also, I was forced to teach a subject I had no experience in for 5 of my 6 classes, while a TFA employee was hired at the same time as me and got to teach the subject I have a degree in. Administration is an enormous reason people leave their jobs. Story 84. Kind of a non-answer, but relevant to the topic. I've taught in 3 different areas. One was inner city, near LA, but more hood. One was in a really bad neighborhood in an out-of-the-way place. And the third was in a smaller town with a much better community. I can relate to many of the comments I see here. Many of them happened to me. Kids selling drugs, threatened and assaulted by kids, admin blaming me for both and saying, "They need you here." Yeah, screw that. It's night and day. What a difference a competent admin and a decent community can make. I almost quit teaching after the first 3 years. Now, I make good money and love every day in the classroom. So, for you teachers considering quitting altogether, just take a risk and move to a different community. It could be the change you need. Story 85. The place was a hellhole to begin with. I could take quite a bit of abuse, but after 6 years it was wearing on me. 3 things happened one day. 1. Michael K., a chubby effer who was kicked out of every school in New Zealand, was acting like a jerk, so hey, I told him to stop. He started getting violent, picking up a shard of broken glass and attempts to shank me. I was younger then and fencing, as in the sport, regularly, so my reflexes took over and I was able to grab both of his hands. "You need to sit down and cool it," I said, and he replies with a "make me" and proceeds to slash at me again. So I stepped forward with my foot firmly planted between his and simply used the leverage to make him fall on his own butt and dropping the glass. Made ya. 2. A jerk staff member says to me later, "What did you say to upset Mike?" Screw you, Mark. 3. A teacher friend of mine was talking to me later in the day saying one of the new kids punched her. My immediate thought was of punching the kid back, and I knew I would have done it too. No hesitation, I would have just slugged the kid right in the jaw. It was then I knew I was done and I had to leave before I did something stupid. Gave my notice that day. Story 86. As a teacher, my screw this moment was when another teacher blamed the naughtiest girl in school for something she didn't even do just because it was convenient. What happened was that another boy in my drama class, for God knows what reason, bit himself and blamed this girl. I was the only one who was in that class, and this girl was already in timeout on the other end of the room. I'd had my eyes on her like a hawk because I knew how she was. So when I brought the boy to his school teacher, because I worked externally and was not part of their faculty, I emphasized that I was watching her the whole time and she did not do it. The teacher stormed into the room insisting that I don't know what she's like, and she tried to drag the girl out. I try not to get involved in school drama and discipline because it can get me in trouble since it's not my job scope. But I do not believe in wrongfully punishing and labeling children, especially when they're only 5 years old. Yes, 5. I stood in between her and the teacher and refused to move. I honestly can't remember what happened after that, but my worst moments as a teacher have always been dealing with staff, not students. So, let me get this straight. This teacher looked you dead in the eyes and essentially said, "I don't believe you. You're covering for this random girl for no reason." 'Cause that's the only thing I can think of that makes sense. Is if for some reason you were covering for her. Insane to think that you were lying about it for some reason, or just not listening to you. Also crazy to have a vendetta against a 5-year-old. Anyway, that was the last story for today. If we've learned anything in this thread, it's that teachers need more respect. They go through a lot. Well, at least some teachers, because we also heard about some bad teachers in here. It's not an easy job, so show respect. If you're in school now, I don't know, thank your teacher, or at least just give them an easier time. That job is hard. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.